of land and unleashed chaos throughout the world. Thus humans faced horrible monsters, creatures from hell itself. Many settlements were destroyed in attacks by ruthless beings with incredible strength. In a world ravaged by misfortune, countless people disappeared inside the wall for no apparent reason, and then the tears of those doomed to suffer the loss of their loved ones flooded the continent's borders at the very moment the world was on the verge of collapse. But she saw it was the boy she had spent the previous night with. The protagonist couldn't imagine what that man was doing there. She was sure he was sleeping when she left. He knew no fear as he faced the darkness that descended upon the world, thanks to his amazing abilities. He saved the continent and soon founded his Cayeta Empire. Thus began the war hundreds of years later. It all happened in the peaceful Cayeta Empire. The sudden arrival of the Countess made the Emperor think that something terrible had occurred. As a first-ranked knight of the Empire, Rustica Chains held the title of Genius Swordsman Mage. The war against the wall has been going on for hundreds of years. But the number of monsters does not decrease and people continue to disappear. In the last raid, the knights were short-staffed, forcing the sacrifice of the soldiers' children. Apparently, this combat tactic was no longer suitable for the Imperial squadron. Therefore, Rustica thought it would be better for the Cayeta Empire to cross the wall. In that instant, the young woman was beyond the reach of the dark forces, ordering her to be silent. The brilliant knight of the Empire did not understand how great her arrogance was in spouting such nonsense. By enraging the great Emperor, Rustica was trapped in his furious anger because she had lost everything. Her excellent skills with the sword and magic, the honor and title bestowed upon her as a knight, and also the support of all those people who admired her. Literally everything she had. It was time for the girl to open her eyes. From now on, only a dark present awaited her. Rustica opened her eyes as she awoke again from that horrible nightmare she was already sick of. Yesterday at Uncle Ben's tavern, she had drunk too much. Her head was so clouded by the hangover that the heroine noticed almost by a miracle that she woke up with a man. Immediately, fleeting shameful memories of the previous night began to flash through her mind. Rustica Yenis could not believe that the feeling of loneliness had affected her so much. She decided to remember this frivolous and irrational night as a one-time thing. Although the girl was ashamed to flee in the morning, she really needed to escape. Hearing the slam of the door, the man woke up alone in an empty apartment. In reality, Rustica couldn't believe that on such a beautiful day, she would be suffering a deadly hangover. The shame before others was so great that she couldn't even lift her head. Behind her back, rumors spread that she never left home and only showed herself drunk. No one understood how a young woman who got along well with their children had ended up like this, and the protagonist thought the same. Her own destiny intrigued her greatly. Rustica preferred to be an outcast rather than see others be disappointed in her. She didn't want it rumored that Miss Janes had suddenly lost all her powers and was now living in the forest. All she had left was to pretend she didn't exist, and then little by little, everyone would forget about her. It was the best option. Finally, upon arriving home, the protagonist decided to take her medicine as soon as possible. She believed herself to be possessed. She had never taken such a risk. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the bed. What shame she felt. She should live in silence, not get drunk with Uncle Ben and talk uncontrollably. With these thoughts, Rustica slept until night, feeling something strange. She gripped her sword and went out, sensing the energy of a wild beast. It smelled of blood. The beast had to be near, very near. Following her instinct, the huntress tracked the source of the stench in the forest. A mysterious guy took down 2 bears and fled. The heroine had to know who that brave fighter was, but she saw it was the boy she had spent the previous night with. The protagonist couldn't even imagine what that man was doing there. She was sure he was sleeping when she left, so she thought he had followed her. Furious, the girl demanded that he bother to explain what was happening. It turns out she didn't remember having shared bread with him as children. She even believed she had only given bread to him. The disappointment was noticeable in his voice, since others also received chocolate from the lady. That was more important than his wounds. It was incredible that she remembered nothing. In that instant, the image of a child soldier she saw on a wall came to mind, and she had dared to abandon that very same boy, hurting his feelings. After years of relentless searching, the man was happy to see her again. Despite his wounds, the young man assumed something didn't go well last night due to his inexperience. Yesterday was his first time. But he promised to try harder in the future, so that the noble lady wouldn't leave him alone, whether out of shame or because of the wounds. The boy collapsed on top of her unconscious. After all, she had to take him to her house and treat his wounds. If he were a normal man, he would have died long ago from the rupture of his internal organs. Even for a knight of the Imperial Order, defeating 2 bears almost barehanded is a difficult task. If they really met at the wall, then Rue was a knight and was 18 years old. Although she remembered it vaguely, even then his face stood out from the rest. However, the boy was still very small, so the young woman thought she had gone crazy. She didn't expect to meet him, as she doubted that he too had suddenly lost all his powers. Upon opening his eyes, a handsome young man awoke, unable to look away from his beloved. He was so beautiful that it took Rue's breath away just by looking at him. Fearing the boy was a spy for the Emperor, the heroine ordered him to leave, but he smiled beautifully and thanked her for the rescue. Despite the girl's madness, despite his multiple fractures, he got up and began to inspect the girl's dwelling. The stranger he behaved, the more questions arose in Rustica's mind because only a madman would attack two bears with a simple sword. Now that no longer mattered to the young man because they were finally together. The girl's departure had saddened him so much that now he would not leave without returning her feelings. The heroine considered their night together a mistake. The young man spent the night with her out of affection, and now his heart was shattered. Faced with this, he demanded that the girl say his name. The boy's name was Hayden Constant Roston Beller, but Rue decided not to reveal it. Since they separated by the wall, the girl had lived there for 4 years. As she loved that place and never left it, Hayden decided to move in too. Yesterday was his first time, and he wanted to take responsibility for it. Fed up with his insistence, Rue remembered that he used to have white hair. This was due to his repeated attempts to cross the wall. Now collapsed, the Cayeta Empire to which they were loyal was no longer the only one. The girl believed it was impossible to break the wall. It was a miracle of nature. It stands so tall that it's impossible to climb and is made of an unknown material. While she was shopping at the market, the shop owner suddenly recognized the girl. She's from Cayeta. The rumors that reached him recently from a merchant about the broken wall, he thought they were crazy. That's why the old man asked if she had been drinking at Ben's. Yes, he has a potent drink. You're the second person from outside who says the wall has been torn down. This doesn't look good at all. If that were true, Rue couldn't even imagine how much the war would have intensified. It was no time for jokes. The heroine's head was spinning, but she had no strength left. Hayden had waited so long to meet the girl, but his dreams were shattered upon learning that she remembered nothing. The young man couldn't even imagine what that bastard Carlos had done to her. Good thing a bear injured him. It was a perfect excuse to stay with Rue longer. At that moment, a messenger bird flew into the house. Just when Hayden thought they would no longer find him according to the letter, Carlos still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Soon people would cross the breach, so the man decided not to intervene as he had no desire whatsoever to meet that wretch again. It was not the time to think about the Emperor. Now the most important thing was a much more valuable person. The hero of Cayeta and his savior Rustica Chanes, whom the man astonishingly wished to steal. Hayden's wounds were healing his bones, mending at a terrifying speed, and his color was returning. Every time the girl started to suspect something, Hayden would say with a smile that he had regained his strength thanks to the wall. It seemed his recovery was convenient for Rue, as he chopped firewood wonderfully and was not afraid of work. However, the heroine was not happy about his arrival. This was not the happy ending she dreamed of. Clearly this guy was very suspicious, and this won't be the end of it, not with that strength and regeneration. It was obvious the army would want to recruit him. Accustomed to solitude, she never imagined she would feel this lonely. A messenger from the master soon arrived. Apparently they loved the bear hide, 50 coins for each one. How could she refuse such an offer? Upon arrival, the lord paid her instantly in cash. It turns out he was also aware of the situation in the Cayeta Empire, verified information according to him. Everything pointed to a new war being on the verge of breaking out. It is rumored that behind the wall, a monster king appeared, an incredibly handsome black-haired man. From the description, he resembles Hayden. Impossible, simply impossible. The rumors about the breach in the wall were well-founded, but the heroine needed to check for herself. After deciding to go to the north wall, Rustica prepared to go home and pack. She had fled here, unable to bear the scorn of her acquaintances. After losing her powers as the young woman crossed the forest, she was very surprised to see Hayden. She told him she was paid for the bear hides enough to go somewhere. The lord thought leaving was a good idea. But she wasn't planning on leaving. It was because of him. What this man wanted from her remained a mystery to the girl. Living in such a world was unbearable. Seeing how bad everything was, Rustica wanted nothing more to do with it. Hayden didn't understand why the young woman was so irresponsible. It was just one night, so Rue didn't give that fleeting encounter much thought. And if they were to meet again, the young man should just pretend he didn't know her if the heroine wished it so. Hayden was ready to give in at that moment. The master left his lady in peace. Soon they would meet face to face again. A strange sequence of events wasn't quite fitting together in the heroine's mind. When Rustica returned home, Hayden had vanished as if he had never been there. Reviewing all possible options, the girl thought he was a powerful magician, able to teleport. She was barely savoring the silence when she suddenly heard the sound of footsteps on the other side of the door. Someone was ordering the Knight of the Cayeta Empire to come out and receive orders. Reluctantly opening the door, the young woman saw Alwyn Rochester on the threshold. He brought good news. His Majesty the Emperor was summoning the girl to return to Cayeta. After chugging a whole can of beer in anger, Rustica flatly refused to go to the Empire, preferring to be considered dead from drinking, than to return to the one who mocked her. The Emperor sentenced Countess Rustica to be sent to the Perceta Empire as a diplomat. And now the girl couldn't be grateful for such an opportunity, as it wasn't her dream given that Rue was already 25. Aldwin suggested she see it as an opportunity to start a new career. There could be no political agreement when from Perceta monsters were arriving in their lands. Although it was hard for the heroine to accept, in reality, the situation wasn't so bad. Besides, the lord requested to go with her as a personal guard. How thoughtful. Although Rustica had no family, she didn't want to go to a barbaric country full of monsters. It turned out His Majesty cared so much for the girl that he knew her whereabouts. Alwyn's face was unbearable, a fanatic who would always follow Carlos. And to think that before, as an imperial knight, Rustica was like that. After all, she was the one who most wanted to be behind the wall. And she got an incredible opportunity. After deciding, the heroine understood that she would either die alone in that cabin, or behind the wall. It made no difference. Ruse prepared quite quickly. All this time, she had lived in a way that allowed her to leave at any moment. If possible, she planned to return there. After all, that was her home. For such a mission, His Majesty personally gave the Lord a teleportation stone. The power of the magic stone enveloped the heroes and opened the way to the imperial palace of Khatat. In the capital of the Kayeta Empire, in front of the gates of the Khatat Palace, Rue saw the crack for the first time. It was simply impossible to believe. A huge wall was shattered. That's why the Emperor invited the first-ranked knight to the throne room of the imperial palace of Khatat. After so many years, the protagonist returned sooner than expected. Months turned into years until she finally met Carlos Arthur. The Empire had never seen anything like it. That's why the Lord was so confused. No one had any idea what that country was like, so the diplomat's task is crucial. Rustica had to go there and find her people no matter what. His Majesty also ordered her to find out how they create monsters and report back. The guide on the other side was already waiting for her, so they ordered her to hurry. It turns out that in return, Rue will only get a decent salary. What a disappointment. However, she had no other choice but to do everything in her power. She was convinced the Emperor summoned her on purpose, knowing about her parents who disappeared behind the wall. A group of diplomats from the Kayeta Empire, hastily assembled to go to the Perceta Empire, consisted of only 4 people. First, the diplomat was a former knight, a genius of sword and magic stripped of her abilities, Rustica Yenis. Her bodyguard and confidant, the Viscount of Melborough, Aldwin Rochester. The second companion, the Knight of the Imperial Order, Elisa Barkova, and a maid to run the household. Aldwin himself had volunteered for the position, so Rue was sure he was sent to spy on her. The protagonist was impressed by Elisa's mastery of the sword, and her tracking skills, meaning she could be an assassin. Martin worked in the Imperial Palace, and was surely one of Carlos's men. Rustica was accompanied by people who were completely devoted to the Emperor. A terrible journey awaited her, one where she couldn't relax for a single second. When all the preparations were finally completed, the Imperial Knights set off. Their destination was the Divine Fissure. They were heading to the other side of the wall. Before reaching the other country, it felt as if they were departing for the afterlife. Alwyn was ready, as he was going there in search of a better life. Rumors had reached him that their representatives had already been there. The naive young man was convinced that the other side had offered them a truce not to kill them. Most people thought they were getting weaker, which is why they accepted the agreement, the typical thinking of someone who believes Kayeta is the center of the universe. It was obvious to Rue now. As they had been ordered, the brave heroes had to enter the dark fissure. Everything was decided, so Rustica decided to enjoy the simple opportunity to cross the wall. The world hidden behind the divine wall astonished the Imperial Knights. They found themselves on a crystal bridge, heading towards the gates of another reality. This was completely different from what Alwyn had seen from the other side. Everything around them could be an illusion, so Rustica asked him to be cautious when speaking. At the other end of the crystal bridge, representatives from the Perceta Empire were already waiting. Simon Camberg, Count Palatine, was sent by His Majesty the Emperor of Perceta. They prepared a carriage for Lady Rustica Janes, her 2 companions, and her valet. The expectations of monsters behind the wall were shattered by the brilliant reality. In the end, the atmosphere was very calm, similar to Kayeta's in many ways. The small city at the summit was the fortress of Perceta, the capital named Shaili. Rustica entered a completely different world that captivated her with its beauty and expanse. It wasn't long before they arrived at the Imperial Palace of Shaili. The Khatat Imperial Palace was no less luxurious, but this one was impressive from the very entrance. The heroine presented herself before His Majesty the Emperor, with all the nobility gathered. The son of the Perceta Empire, the great emperor, was already awaiting his guest. His lordship radiated beauty and welcomed Lady Rustica to the palace. On his flawless face, it was undeniable that he was Hayden. He was one of a kind. The hole in the wall, the Perceta Empire, the great Emperor Hayden. Rustica hoped it was all a dream. That guy couldn't be in this remote place, so the girl decided she must have been dreaming. The Kayeta Emperor, just as she had imagined, also believed it was necessary to follow the path of peace and harmony. From the records, Hayden knew that Lady Rustica was from the Imperial Order of Knights, and also mastered magic. In the Perceta Empire, magic is scarce, and its use is forbidden. It was obvious Hayden knew Rue was incapable of using magic, but he suspected that someone else was hiding behind the scenes. Someone else, not him. The Hayden the protagonist met in Khalid was sweet and smiling, while the Emperor is so noble and arrogant. They seem like different people. His Majesty sensed that the young woman found it hard to leave her home. Now in Perceta, she just had to be careful with the alcohol, which is quite strong. The Emperor enjoyed the meeting, hoping Lady Janes would have a good time. From the way that man spoke, there was no doubt it was Hayden. After the meeting, Rustica returned to the carriage and Alwyn sighed in relief. He suddenly became curious to know when the young man found out about his appointment. After only 2 days of reflection, the gentleman volunteered to accompany her. It's likely the girl's candidacy was considered before and Alwyn found out from his father 4 days ago. Hayden appeared in an unnamed territory of the Momentum Kingdom. Apparently, the Emperor went personally to spy on the diplomat from the Cayeta Empire. Since today's matters are resolved, Alwyn suggested stopping at the Cayeta Embassy. The boy thought they would be treated poorly there, but everything turned out to be much better than he expected. And now the heroine came up with the brilliant idea of spreading the rumor that the Emperor of Perceta is inexperienced in bed. As soon as the heroes arrived at the embassy, an avalanche of work fell upon them. They would not be able to handle such a volume of work, so Alwyn was tasked with hiring workers. Honestly, Rustica was surprised that the embassy provided by Perceta was so good. After writing a list of tasks and reviewing documents, all that was left was to get the money at the exchange rate. As a former knight, the girl hated the diplomatic profession from the very beginning, and now even more so. However, if she truly thought that she wouldn't have come this far. Rustica Janice has been lazing around for 4 years. It's time to take the reins. It turns out that determination and fighting spirit didn't help at all for things to go well. It's not easy to interact with people after so many years of isolation. She was distracted from her thoughts by an unknown young man, who appeared at the most unexpected moment. A squadron from Cayeta arrived at the neighboring house where the gentleman lived. He arrived here 4 years ago from the neighboring country of Nirvana, and this was his embassy. To his right was the Soulstain Embassy. The whole street was his. Noticing they were the first from Perceta, the gentleman assumed they had exchanged money. Rustica was just about to ask where she should go now. There was no information about Cayeta's currency, so the gentleman decided to advise her. Count Felix Kekas kindly offered her his card and permission to contact him. As a farewell, he directed the young diplomat to the bank at the end of the street. According to the card, the gentleman was also an ambassador, a trend among the youth in Perceta. No one imagined that the bank owner would fleece the Cayetans like that. If the emperor knew how they treated the ambassador from Cayeta, he would be furious. What can you do in this country? They will always be seen as enemies. In any case, they managed to exchange the Cayetan gold at a bank. It was the ideal time to go to the shopping district to a store with a long line. Seeing the immense crowd, Rustica was intrigued by what was causing such a commotion. A magazine stand was nearby, and she decided to pass the time reading a newspaper. Cayeta has an official bulletin and a newspaper endlessly praising the emperor. Among 300 newspapers, the girl found one titled, Nation of Thieves of Cayeta. The heroine couldn't help but buy the newspaper, which described a direct attack on the Cayeta Empire. A nearby gentleman scorned the third-rate magazine, which favored the aristocrats and which he hated. Hayden appeared by her side always as suddenly as a thunderclap on a sunny day. However, Rustica continued to pretend she didn't know him at all. In the future, they would see each other often, so the emperor asked for permission to pretend he knew her. In the castle, he was very kind and attentive. Although it was normal, she felt uncomfortable. Quickly paying for the magazines, Rustica left immediately. Alwyn had entered the store a while ago, but still hadn't been seen coming out according to Hayden. Everyone who entered that store lost their minds. The only thing he asked was for her to dedicate a little of her time to him. The gentleman preferred silence, but came to speak personally with the ambassador, addressing more important matters. He was very happy about their long-awaited meeting. Hayden noticed that they were close to Miss Janice's companion. In that case, he ordered her to set better boundaries between them. Even so, the gentleman was a little worried about that supposed colleague and assassin with the appearance of a knight, who would draw his sword without hesitation for the emperor, and to top it all off, an accompanying servant with deep knowledge of poisons. Lady Janice's companions were extremely cruel, and it is unclear whether their goal is to protect her or to watch her. The emperor conducted a thorough investigation, but declaring that to her was already too much for her. However, the Perceta Empire would not simply open its doors to enemies, so there was surely a reason. Honestly, the handsome emperor only hoped that Janice would understand his feelings well. He sincerely wished for her to have a good time in Perceta. Those words sounded like a hint for the diplomat from the enemy country to switch sides. Hayden's only hope was that Janice would understand him and wish to stay there forever. But if there wasn't a good reason, Rustica felt obligated to refuse flatly. The emperor believed his motives were clear, but he seemed to be threatening her. Ruth was sent there by an enemy country, and yet he continued to extend a hand to her. But no matter how insignificant her status was, the heroine also had her pride. In that instant, Hayden's face changed, showing that he didn't care at all. A strong pressure ran through her body. The emperor's gaze made Rue tremble. She couldn't shake the feeling that Hayden could crush her with a single finger. On the way, the brave lady contemplated many outcomes, even dying with dignity. The horrible feeling of oppression disappeared instantly. Hayden had only scared the girl. So as not to seem like a villain, the emperor apologized and promised to be more careful when speaking. He decided to strive to earn her trust. But for Ruth, it was enough that he thought about it. To the west of Perceta, there was a place called Plock that encompassed plains and mountains. The count who ruled there had the surname Jeans, and perhaps there Rue could find someone dear. While Alwyn waited for his turn in the store, he even thought he was going to die. When he was finally free, he noticed that Rustica was talking to someone before leaving. Hayden wished the girl to have fun in Shale. The emperor's presence surprised Alwyn. However, there were too many prying ears to talk. Rustica was going to personally inform the Emperor about what they had both discussed. After a hard day in the city, a luxurious dinner with various delicacies awaited them. Martin saw nothing special in the masterpieces he prepared, with his own hands. The servant would do the impossible if his lady craved one of her favorite dishes. For some reason, the heroine remembered the Emperor's words and now felt uncomfortable. But Rustica couldn't avoid eating in front of Martin. Although she decided to try only one spoonful, the soup was so delicious that it was worth dying for such a meal. Suddenly, a female assassin in a knight's mask spoke to the heroine. Rustica didn't tell her about her meeting with the Emperor, and promised to write it in the report. Upon learning that events were being held in Chalea, Alwyn suggested they prepare as well. In reality, the Cayeta embassy was officially considered their enemy. They would hardly be accepted. The loud noise of the protest in front of the embassy prevented Miss Janice from sleeping for a good while. Sincere people were demanding the immediate return home of the representatives from the other country. Despite the danger, the girl went out anyway, and Alwyn arrived immediately upon hearing the noise. With so many guards, she had nothing to fear. No one could enter undetected. She ordered the knight to prepare as they still had to send the invitations. It turned out that they had also received 3 invitations. But Rue already grimaced prematurely. If everything goes as planned, the heroine will find that noble with the surname Yenes. It seemed that only the madman would send an invitation to the embassy of an enemy country. Rue ordered all the letters with the imperial seal to be burned immediately. Another letter notified of a meeting of diplomats from Perceta. The third letter that interested the heroine came from the neighboring embassy of Nerva. In the letter, the ambassador, Felix, invited the Cayetan ambassador for tea the day after tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Rue could not ignore that letter. She even asked Martin to prepare a dessert. However, that letter with the imperial seal wouldn't leave the girl in peace. Determined to take a quick look, she opened the envelope and was horrified. This afternoon, Lady Janice was invited for a snack at the imperial palace of Perceta. The diplomat from Cayeta was treated like a thief trampling on foreign land. Rustica wouldn't be surprised if an assassin snuck into her embassy at night, and of course that assassin would be stronger than her current guard. The heroine didn't want to leave Eliza with Martin, so she took her along, but now she was having second thoughts. By the way, it was dangerous to go out with so many protests everywhere, and no one guaranteed safety at home. Every day a new adventure. Just as Rue feared the cake was taken from her, and now arriving empty-handed was awkward, having lost the will to live. Decided to simply ask to have her killed, the young and charming emperor organized a beautiful party of tea in his palace garden. Hayden was glad that the girl was adapting at the embassy and offered her tea. In this regard, the lady was simple, although she actually considered tea to be smelly hot water. In society, people are gossips, so anything she says will spread. Rustica's country attracts a lot of attention, but she couldn't change public opinion. That sounded as if she had already been a victim of similar rumors. The girl was happy about the emperor's invitation, but she didn't understand why he had summoned her. In fact, a personal meeting with the emperor was already a great honor. Hayden was looking to connect and plan to befriend her. Russ's cup was still full, which indicated that she didn't like the tea, or perhaps it was all because of the place where she had to have it. A wild animal's roar made her turn, and she saw an enormous monster, the prototype of the creature they were talking about in Keleth. It was even more terrifying seeing it in person. Rustica's blood boiled. Damn, Emperor. The monster was approaching. And the heroine couldn't use magic, but it was too late to flee. The strange thing was that the Emperor didn't even flinch, so it was just a test. Staring her fears in the eye, she could neither kill the monster nor escape. The bloodthirsty creature with its great power was overwhelming her. It seemed to be her end. Just when everything looked like it would end badly, a powerful magic strike stopped the monster in its tracks. Everything changed in an instant. The heroine appeared in a terrifying and completely different place. The Emperor had already said that a place existed ruled by a noble with the same last name as Rustica. It turned out they were in the most remote area of Perceta, and by the looks of it, monsters were frequent visitors. Perceta had run out of mages. The wandering mana concentrates, and that's why the monster wave appears. If Hayden wanted to scare Miss Jens with the monsters, he certainly succeeded. He finally captured the girl's attention. The Lord wanted to know what her interests were. He felt bad for scaring her, but it was still an impressive sight. That piercing gaze seemed to suppress all of the heroine's emotions and instincts. The truth was, her fighting instinct had atrophied after so many years of isolation. Upon hearing that, Hayden was convinced that Emperor Cayeta had told her about it. Only now did Rustica understand that this man had never threatened her. In reality, all his hostility from the very beginning was aimed at Carlos. The instincts acquired on the battlefield don't just disappear like that. That's what Rue thought. Even old knights retain their sharpness. To say she had lost it with age is absurd. Rustica desperately assured him that her skills were now worse than those of a novice knight. If this was all based on her old reputation, Hayden had chosen the wrong path. She could no longer even lift her sword. However, the Emperor believed it was a blatant lie and was even ready to prove otherwise, which she thought was impossible. The heroine thought this conversation was pointless. In that case, Hayden ordered her to cancel all her plans and suggested they meet tomorrow. With frequent meetings, he planned to build trust and make her believe him. Soon Jens left, agreeing to meet tomorrow at the same time. At that moment, the poison test was ready, and the servant brought a piece of cake despite the high risk. Hayden couldn't resist trying Lou's gift. According to the servant, reports were coming in about a powerful monster wave in the west. The master was not only aware but had had to face a huge monster himself. The emperor only stopped the monster wave from the north, but the one in the west will be much worse. The intrepid emperor was ready to leave at any moment. He also ordered to announce the magic waves detected today in Calith. Hayden was burning to hear from Carlos Arturo. Ingraman was awaiting his arrival. Rustica shouldn't be sitting up writing a report at this hour of the night. Originally, the young woman was trying to find out who that noble with the last name Jens was. The young woman didn't want to get her hopes up about her parents, but she couldn't stay silent if there was any hope of finding her parents, who disappeared in the war 11 years ago. Rue didn't want to lose that hope. She gets tired every day, but after what she saw today after a long time, she felt strange-like in the old days when her ladyship would instinctively recognize the presence of monsters. Anxiety ran through her entire body. Feeling the same way right now, Rustica suddenly noticed a strange energy. Magical forces enveloped the room, and in that instant, Carlos Arthur Ingram appeared. The Lord was very interested to know how she was feeling after a few days in Perceta. In reality, he wasn't actually there. It was a kind of illusion. Emperor Cayeta came out of curiosity to see how Lady Jens was doing. An exquisite way to show his interest. Just when Rue was about to die after he had pushed her to her death, Carlos did not expect to hear that the young woman had discovered that the Emperor of Perceta is crazy. The fact is, since the very first day of her arrival, Hayden has been trying to convince her to switch sides, and today he invited the girl to tea to get closer, which has piqued Carlos's interest. Rustica has been in Perceta for 3 days, but she still can't get used to it. Curiously, no protests were heard today. Soon the protagonist arrived at the imperial palace of Alea to visit His Highness. The Lord ordered her to concentrate as he was about to give a simple etiquette lesson. He had already talked about banning magic, and yet Emperor Cayeta was playing with fire. Until yesterday, Rustica hadn't given any importance to them not throwing stones at her window. Even more baffling for the Emperor was Carlos's appearance in such casual clothes. It turns out the Lord saw him arrive in an unbuttoned shirt and a blue robe. In his judgment, it was a tactless display. So Hayden suggested etiquette lessons for the girl. The Emperor would not back down, but this carried the risk of a war between their countries. He thought he had handled it quite well, but he was assured otherwise. Suddenly, His Majesty became curious about whether the young lady, Jens, knew how to dance. The girl was instantly baffled, but one doesn't need to be a noble to know how to dance. Hayden understood his curiosity, but considered it reckless. He was going to take matters into his own hands, blaming not Rustica, but Emperor Cayeta. Despite that slight, if the lady accepts, the Emperor will pretend nothing happened before her first dance, and with the Emperor himself no less. She had to take off her coat. She felt useless, but Hayden had chosen to teach her. It was his decision. Still, she couldn't help feeling nervous being so close to the Emperor of Perceta. Seeing his composure, she thought she shouldn't worry and took him by the waist. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and as they got closer, Russ smelled his scent while looking into his eyes. She suddenly remembered the night they spent together. She was afraid of making a mistake, but Hayden would endure her stepping on his feet up to 100 times. Dancing. Despite her fear, Rustica stepped on the Emperor's foot. She was the one who stepped on him, but surprisingly, she was also the one who cried out. The embarrassment of the incident wouldn't let her continue, but the Lord couldn't let her leave. If the girl felt regret, she should stay with him, not run away again. So that Hayden wouldn't suffer because of her heavy knight's boots, Rustica took them off in a flash and stood barefoot. After she took off her shoes, the Emperor lifted the girl and placed her on top of his feet. Upon opening the invitation from the imperial palace, the protagonist had anticipated a slow and exhausting day, but looking into the Emperor's eyes, she literally couldn't look away. Only now did the girl realize that maybe the day wouldn't be as long as she thought. In a short time, Rustica learned not only the basics of dancing, but much more. It was time for a break, so Hayden invited the girl to join him for lunch. Today, they had a boring etiquette lesson, and the next class would be about table manners. In the end, Rustica took a little while getting ready for lunch, but she looked absolutely stunning. Trousers on the ladies of the Empire were considered tasteless, so she had to wear what Hayden gave her. He stared at her so captivated that it was hard to tell what he was really thinking. Noticing how well the dress suited the young lady, Jens the Lord presented it to her as a gift. The sun was pleasantly warm, and the Lord wanted to have lunch outside, but the cool breeze convinced him to eat indoors. If Ambassador Jens had had more time, he was sure she would have loved the tour of Shaley. Now was not the best time for sightseeing. Too many foreign eyes were on Cayeta. This is the perfect opportunity to deceive someone as naive as Rustica, so Hayden advised her to choose carefully who to trust, and what advice to listen to, what she should worry about, and what she should accept into her life. The next day, the heroine returned to the Nerva embassy where Felix was waiting for her. It turns out a story came out in the newspapers yesterday saying the Emperor had done horrible things to her. As a foreign correspondent, Felix knew the rumors, and that the Emperor could confront the well-established nobles. Rustica wanted to know more about the mysterious personality of Emperor Hayden. Baylor was the emperor of the great Empire of Perceta. He was the last of the Orthodox Baylor dynasty, which disappeared 430 years ago. In all that time, no heir appeared. Someone kidnapped the members and stole the treasures, and that someone was from Cayeta. More precisely, the emperor of Cayeta, Carlos Arthur Ingram. Perceta believes that Carlos took everything from Perceta. And then he built a wall between Perceta and Cayeta, which were once one. There is a wall, and the territory was reduced. According to sources, hundreds of years have passed, and Perceta still does not recognize Cayeta. Almost half of Perceta's imperial titles correspond to the southern area, now Cayeta. Regarding Rustica's question about the fall of the empire, the imperial insignia was preserved. According to Felix, the nobles did not break away because they didn't want to pay taxes regularly. But despite everything, Perceta is a country ruled by the sages, fearsome sages isolated from the world, who protect the legacy of the Perceta Empire with tooth and nail, living for millennia. They are capable of using magic even when it was forgotten in Perceta. Analyzing each region, in the east was the Lord of the Dragons, their leader. The north remains a mystery. Little is known about it. And finally, in the west was the Lord of the Magic Tower. Guardian of all magic and knowledge, it is rumored that a sage from the west ruled the tower before the emperor. Now he is retired. The ambassador says that magic was forbidden in this country, so there can't be people in the tower in any case. Those people will not allow the imperial mark to be removed, recognizing the emperor as a Baylor heir. Probably no noble could oppose the powerful Lord of the Dragons. Having an emperor is better, as the imperial mark was not removed due to the vacant throne of the ducal era. Despite his young age, the new Emperor of Perceta has proven to be a tough nut to crack. He immediately began to clear the northern lands of monsters, thus proving his power and influence. For 400 years during the emperor's absence, the nobles took care of the monsters. Felix noted that the eastern lands were the only prosperous place obeying the Lord of the Dragons. He only rarely sent armies beyond the walls of Cayeta. Little by little, they were taking land until the emperor appeared from the north and the east. For the nobles of the east, the emperor brought fear for the first time. Many fled to the north, but the monsters stopped them. The emperor was cold towards the fugitives, and that was one of the reasons for the eastern nobles' antipathy. Thus ended the subjugation of the northern monsters in the east. After only 4 battles, the emperor ignored the power and the public opinion of the eastern nobles. Felix was convinced that the Emperor of Perceta was an enigmatic figure. His intentions were a mystery to everyone. Therefore, everyone in this country wonders why so much attention is focused on Miss James. The young woman became the main topic of conversation in Perceta, but it was not enough to intimidate her. It turned out that Felix learned from the news that the envoy from Cayeta had been carried out of the palace completely fainted. The pen was mightier than the sword. All the diplomats were betting on how long Miss James would last. The Lord bet on 1 week, but that was too mean, so Rustica ordered him to change the bet to 2 weeks, planning for him to win. The protagonist was confident in her bet. Hayden wanted her to stay in Perceta, but it is not his will that keeps the girl here. Everything depends on what she discovers later. In search of answers to her questions, Rustica set off for the National Library of Chile. The plans in her head changed 2 days ago when Carlos visited her at the embassy. Then the Lord appeared with the proposal to place Miss James in a new position. He chose the girl as a minister of Perceta because he shared her feelings about her parents. The protagonist knew that in his intention not to hinder her search, there was a selfish motive. Recalling that Rustica wanted her reward, the emperor felt that his response was confusing. That day he promised to help find her parents and support his knight. Miss James would have the opportunity to live in Calet with her parents in peace. Upon finishing their work, Carlos and Hayden were the ones who brought up the subject of her parents. Now the heroine must choose whom to trust. But first she must make sure they are still alive. After a long search, Rustica found information on Ethan Arthur Ginsberg and Mylene Ginsberg. When she was 14 years old, her parents disappeared without a trace behind the wall. Upon moving to the enemy country, they even obtained a noble title and lived in abundance. Now the girl finds it hard to believe they had 3 more daughters. She decided that her parents had decided to erase her from their memory and start a new life in Perceta. 11 years have passed since those horrible days when Rustica walked on a razor's edge, fighting in endless battles against monsters. All this time she was pursued by a single goal. Alone and witnessing the death of her own soul and body, the young woman vowed to resist. To resist alone like a worthy knight and daughter. She promised to tear down the wall and save her parents, but now, Rustica only arrived in a foreign country as an enemy. She became an ambassador for Perceta and lost all opportunity. Her parents earned a title of honor, while Rue was a simpleton barely able to hold a sword. She was so ashamed of this that she wanted to run away, but she had nowhere to run. Whether it was Carlos or Hayden, both were good, but it made no sense for her to go through this alone. The girl's parents didn't know she was there. They weren't even looking for her. These ponderings ended up confusing the heroine. She didn't know what to do the next morning. Rustica woke up a mess. Yesterday she was so distressed that she couldn't sleep. She didn't sleep all night, and she still couldn't sort out her thoughts. To be honest, the girl didn't rule out that the Emperor of Perceta would betray her. The fact that Carlos had already come in person with the proposal suggested he wasn't lying. Just when Miss James least expected it, a young servant girl approached her. This new maiden Martin had spoken of seemed even younger than a 14-year-old girl. Rue tried to compose herself so as not to make a bad impression in front of the child. It turned out that Ryusilla knew perfectly well that Miss James had come as an ambassador. As soon as she learned that breakfast was ready, the heroine left, saying a polite goodbye. This maiden was so sweet that Rue was sure they would become friends. Seeing the girl's haggard face, the boys knew instantly that she hadn't slept well. With money on the line, she should be resting. But the invitation had already been sent to the ambassador. Rustica even thought that everyone present was betting on how long she would last. Not wanting to see the envelope, the girl opened it reluctantly. This morning she was invited to the palace. It was so unexpected. As soon as she arrived at the palace, the emperor immediately ordered her to change her clothes. The girl had barely arrived and he was already making her feel miserable. Today they had an outdoor walk planned, luckily. The pants weren't too tight. Soon Hayden led the girl through the forest, but Rustica couldn't calm down. He tried to get her interested, but seeing the same expression over and over is very sad. The emperor didn't prepare anything special. Only one person would be displeased if Rue doesn't remember him. The Lord wanted the girl to meet him in person and remember him. Feeling an incredibly strong aura, the girl saw a huge monster running towards her at full speed. That feeling of fear and déjà vu made her heart beat faster. Rustica remembered. It turned out the monster wasn't going to attack her, but landed tamely on the ground. The heroine came face to face with Icarus, a huge eagle with the body of a dog and gigantic wings. From the signs of affection, it was clear that he and the emperor had a very special relationship. To start, Hayden introduced them, but for Rue, it was new to see a friendly monster. The confused monster hid immediately, although the one who should have been hiding was Rustica. She couldn't run away, or the monster would chase her and the emperor wouldn't be able to stop it. As the master said, "It seems you two will have to see each other very often in the future." In that case, the protagonist extended her hand, and the pet reluctantly allowed itself to be tamed. Of course, Icarus didn't let just anyone ride him, but Hayden proposed that she fly, even offering his help, but the girl trusted her equestrian skills. The problem is that Icarus was not a horse but a griffin. Without realizing it, Rustica was already mounted on the enormous bird. The main thing was the safety device, which shouldn't come loose. Suddenly, someone called the emperor and the master. He left the girl alone with the griffin. The situation must have been grave for Count Simon to run off searching for them. How unfair it is to be summoned to the palace so suddenly, and on the back of a griffin at that. Rustica could barely hold on tight. When the enormous Icarus took off and began to beat his wings, the girl was so scared that she was trying desperately to convince the griffin to lie back down. However, at that moment, Icarus spread his wings as if he were about to take flight instantly. Icarus, the divine beast of the great Emperor of Perceta, flew over Chalea, bewildering the envoy from Cayeta. In those times, when Rustica was one of Cayeta's cavalry, there was a magical beast that terrified the knights with its gigantic body and frightening appearance. It flew at an impossible speed to follow, tearing people apart with its enormous claws, making everyone tremble in fear. The heroine believed, relying only on her knightly instincts, that this was the very creature she was now riding. The girl assumed Icarus was venting his anger for their previous battles. She even remarked that he had emerged from the battle unscathed, as if the monster were mocking her. Of course, with their history of confrontations, Icarus might want to bother her or get revenge. However, when the griffin nudged the girl, she looked up and was left speechless. The beautiful landscapes stretching out below seemed like a miracle the heroine was seeing for the first time. Apparently, Icarus only wanted to show her that, for which Rue was silently grateful. After so much time at such heights, the heroine felt death was near until a hand touched her. Lord Hayden had arrived just in time, as his griffin seemed to have no intention of landing. He didn't recall ordering Icarus to fly off with Ambassador Jens. As the girl was clearly in shock, the emperor decided to apologize immediately. In reality, Rue was feigning her shock, to avoid seeing articles about the consul of Cayeta fainting. Sincerely regretting having scared Miss Jens, the lord took control of the situation. He was going to ensure the girl's safety until landing, so he ordered her to relax. Hayden's initial goal was for Rue to gradually get used to it before ascending, but now he decided to descend before the sunset completely. The sunset was truly beautiful, so Rustica didn't mind staying to watch it longer. Then the lord suggested she lean on him even more. By relaxing her body, they could take a leisurely look around. The emperor showed Miss Jens various places in Chalea, the Mel River, where they were building a bridge, the diplomatic district where she lives, the wide streets, the art museums, and similar places. But nothing she saw impressed the protagonist. Hayden was too close. The warmth of his body pressed against hers, his breath mingling with his voice as he spoke, and the beat of his heart that Rustica felt against her back. It all reminded her of the nighttime intimacy they shared as Rue and Hayden. Rationally, the girl understood she shouldn't have gotten so close to him, but perhaps she could enjoy this warmth a little, even if just for a moment. The road Rue had taken from Cayeta was called Bapel. Any journey across the Bapel Bridge was carried out by the emperor's order. To Rustica, that meant he could take her to her parents, right now. Next time, Hayden promised a proper tour. The sunset was worth it, but Rue felt compelled to refuse, resigning herself to the idea of breaking her neck the next day. Very early news arrived in Perceta about a wave of monsters in the west. Yesterday, after leaving Miss Jens, the emperor had said he had important business. This led the protagonist to think it was because of the monster wave in Felas. Suddenly a loud knock on the door and the maid brought news. It was a message from His Majesty asking Miss Janice to wait for him at the embassy in half an hour. 20 minutes later, without understanding the situation, Rustica set out to meet the Emperor. As she had left hastily on his command, there was no one in front of the embassy. At that moment, the great Hayden flew toward her on a griffin and embraced her tightly. This morning was truly fantastic, portending many interesting things. Nothing was supposed to follow yesterday's script. Miss Jens did not want to die young. The girl looked so dejected every time they met that the Emperor thought she had lost her will to live. Finally relaxing, the protagonist looked forward, and what she saw left her in shock. Flying over hundreds of knights who were crossing the wall, the master was forcing her to join the expedition. The kidnapping of the Cayetan ambassador was something she had only dreamed of, and she was happy to have accomplished it right now. Miss Jens was observing Perceta's military aid from the front row. They were moving so fast that Rustica couldn't even open her eyes against the wind. After flying over Bapel, the heroes came face to face with the enormous mouth of a monster, thirsting for blood. As the girl dodged, fearing she would die, the valiant Hayden split the monster in half with a single blow. Thousands of bloodsuckers swarming Perceta's territory indicated a long road ahead. Suddenly, the Emperor handed her the reins and leapt off, wielding a sharp sword. Death was staring Rue in the face, so the Emperor's taunts were irrelevant. Seeing Miss Jens so bold, Hayden was filled with a happiness that empowered him. His goal was to face a countless number of flying creatures head-on. As long as the Emperor guaranteed Rue's safety, she would accept this dangerous step. The young woman's resolve stunned Hayden. With enormous strength wielding his sword, he would put an end to this. A powerful wave of magic filled with force instantly crashed down upon the horde of monsters. When the air cleared, Hayden ordered them to descend, and Rustica guided the griffin toward the ground, approaching the earth like a projectile. Icarus impacted the ground forcefully, and so the wave of monsters from the wasteland in the northeastern region of Perceta, Felas, was suppressed. Afterward, the knights were ordered to inspect the corpses and leave no survivors. In just 2 attacks, the closest monsters were annihilated. Now the heroine understood why the previous subjugation had ended after 4 battles. In theory, it seemed easy to prevent new monsters from appearing and destroy the existing ones. However, if the Emperor possessed such power, he could surpass Carlos. Finally, Hayden was eager to see Miss Jens's front row reaction. Already tired of the spectacle, Rustica just wanted to return to the embassy. The girl was more critical than expected. Moreover, she didn't understand why she had been brought there. To display the might of Perceta's army, and let her observe the monsters, Hayden had taken the ambassador on a field trip. At that moment, word came that the area was being cleared, but a second wave was expected. Count Felas and the Countess were far from the castle at that moment, leading the battle. They were always prepared to receive Hayden, no matter when he decided to visit. Since the Emperor could not enter the castle in its owner's absence, he opted to make camp in Belford. Rustica had fallen into the trap set by the Emperor of Perceta in no time. Perceta's armed forces arrived safely at the camp in Belford. In the midst of all that chaos, the heroine felt extremely uncomfortable. It was too late to run away, so she followed him to the camp in Belford. But the Emperor, who had dragged her all the way there, paid her no mind, engrossed in conversation. The Imperials were busy setting up temporary tents to spend the night. Rustica racked her brain trying to understand what the Emperor wanted from her. The girl was already quite annoyed. But all this time, Icarus kept pestering her. Hayden called this special treatment. But it certainly didn't benefit the heroine at all, as she was still a foreigner from an enemy state. The members of the Empire treated her with suspicion. Furthermore, Rustica constantly heard about her parents' accomplishments, who lived nearby. All of this frustrated the girl, but she could not reunite with her parents in her current condition, neither as a knight of Cayeta, nor as a consul. She didn't know what problems her incompetence could cause them. In her current state, it was even uncomfortable to propose they return to Cayeta together. And what the heroine feared most was that if her parents were to reject her first, she truly wouldn't be able to bear it. Upon his return, Hayden couldn't help but notice that the two of them had gotten along and grown closer. Seeing the feathers on her head, the Emperor smiled and began to gently pick them off. The temporary lodging was ready, so he suggested they go inside. Miss Jens was getting used to the battlefield, thanks to the acclimatization the Emperor had provided. It turned out that the time had finally come to meet her parents. Hayden assumed that Rue had already realized that Count and Countess Phelas were her parents. Or rather, she already knew. But the ambassador was not happy about the long-awaited family reunion, wondering what his lordship the Emperor was planning. He was unaware of how much she would dislike the meeting with her parents. It was rumored that Miss Jens was a brave and loyal knight. It seemed to the Emperor that loyalty to him was more important to her than the parents standing before her. It could be a touching family reunion, or a scene where the Count and Countess considered their daughter a disgrace. In an unpredictable and childish manner, the Emperor provoked Miss Jens, who was unable to endure another provocation. The furious Rustica impulsively drew her sword. However, she had neither the courage nor the opportunity to face him, and so, the only thing she could do was sacrifice herself. The moment the blood of the First Order Knight was spilled, a magical aura illuminated the Belfort camp. Worried, the knights burst into the Emperor's chambers upon seeing the lifeless body in his arms. In a desperate attempt to save Miss Yennis, Hayden ordered everyone to leave and to let no one enter. Rustica could not wield the sword and felt her entire body become listless, ignoring her own commands nonetheless. It was a very familiar feeling of powerlessness that had not left the heroine since she lost her powers. But she didn't know if just holding the sword was enough to make her lose consciousness, feeling as if something was forcibly controlling her. Rustica's eyes snapped open. With tears in his eyes, Hayden tried to understand why she had done that. He was provoking her to strike him, not stab him, but everything turned out completely different. In her utter confusion, she wondered why he was crying. The girl first wanted to know what was happening to her. Noticing that Rue could see the chains, Hayden ventured to ask if that was truly the case. In that case, everything was fine. At least her vision had fully returned. However, the heroine felt abnormal. Clearly feeling how magic was binding her body, she instinctively understood that she had to break them immediately. Without a second thought, Rue could not die when she tried, as the magic was linked to her life. But it was not yet time. As if to prove him right, strength was once again leaving the girl's body. Rustica understood neither Hayden's words, the magical chains that had appeared on her body, nor the actions of the always impeccable Emperor. They were never questioned in the Cayeta Empire. To doubt the Emperor is pure rebellion. But the brave Miss Yennis dared to question this great Emperor, as she always did, seeking to cross the wall to save her comrades and family. Rue wanted to end the war. In the eyes of the 20-year-old woman, Emperor Carlos seemed uninterested in stopping the war yet. The girl did not lose hope of getting permission to cross the wall and annihilate the barbarians and magical beasts. The adorable novice knight Rustica Yennis was ignorant of the Emperor's true nature. Carlos valued her loyalty, but this was overstepping his bounds. After binding her with magic, the master ordered her to stay in Cayeta and swear eternal loyalty to him. The heroine could not allow her strength to be stolen with such impunity. Waking from the horror she had experienced, Rustica found herself bathed in a cold sweat, but upon opening her eyes and seeing the master before her, she realized it had only been a nightmare. Hayden ordered her not to get up yet, as she was still under the effects of the spell. The young woman would probably remain like this for about one more day. Carlos would never permit her death. The master agreed to stop talking about such things, and to explain everything if Miss Yennis would eat a little. It had been 4 years since Rue was unable to use her power. That was when the magic appeared. Supposedly it was all due to a spell that Hayden considered a curse and exploitation. The brilliant sorceress swordswoman of Cayeta could not use her innate power. That simply couldn't be. The emerald light, a symbol of all the power used by Carlos, meant that he had stolen all of Rustica Yennis's power. In yesterday's conversation, she understood that Hayden's provocations were meant to awaken her abilities. Since then, changes had been occurring in the protagonist, revealing themselves little by little. Upon her vision's awakening, she could see the immense mana that was causing the surge of monsters. For this reason, the Emperor was bound to this place, following her without cease. Rue couldn't see these things for 4 years and wasted her youth blaming herself. People usually stay in denial for more than 1 week, but the heroine got over it quickly. For the last 4 years, she had had enough time for denial. One of Hayden's goals was to reclaim the territory, power, and magic that Carlos stole from Cayeta. Surprisingly, now Rue's intentions had changed, and she had a new objective: she was going to kill Carlos, and she would allow the Emperor to join her. It wasn't that Hayden didn't want to. He simply feared falling in love with her again. Since the Lord was in love, Rustica asked him to help her get revenge. It was so unfair. The girl was going to use the only one who had ever loved her to become the sword of the ruthless and cruel Consulgenes. The Emperor wanted something in return. Surprisingly, the Lord wanted to meet her parents first. Besides, no one can stop parents who live only with the desire to meet their daughter. After those words, all the anguish and worries that Rue had accumulated vanished in a short time. The Emperor flew away, promising to return, leaving the girl to rest. At that moment, she witnessed a knight trying to stop a carriage that was forcing its way in. Charlotte Melmieux, daughter of Baron Gromby, had brought some food for the imperial soldiers who were protecting the Empire. This lady had chosen an inopportune moment, as access to the area was forbidden to outsiders. Suddenly, the sound of galloping resounded, and another carriage appeared at the entrance. Lady Charlotte was ordered to return immediately, as the young woman declared that delivering the cargo to the camp was Felis's duty, and His Majesty was very busy. No outsider could enter the heart of Belfort. It seemed Charlotte despised imperial law. In response, the furious Lady Melmieux pointed to Miss Yennis as an intruder. The ambassador of Cayeta was His Majesty's guest. Rumors about her were already spreading when, just as Rustica least expected it, a flock of bloodthirsty monsters appeared in the sky apparently. The small creatures had separated from the main group and did not pose a great threat. However, although the flock was small, there were enormous specimens among them. Her courage allowed the heroine to attack without hesitation and subdue the terrible monster. Her battlefield-trained eyes had finally returned. Although her body was not the same, she could master it by reading its movements and anticipating the monster's attack. The brave lady dodged and counterattacked. Rue knew her weapon wouldn't last, but not that it would break so quickly. To save the situation, she took an Imperial Knight's sword, and before the final blow, the warrior prepared herself. She ordered the children to close their eyes. Fortunately, everything went well, and the monster attack was repelled. The young women witnessed the horror, an image seared into their memory. Seeing their fear, Rustica couldn't ignore it and decided to support them. She couldn't console the children, but she couldn't bear to see their tears. Now feeling the warmth of the little ones, everything was all right. His Majesty returned just as the event concluded, having finished his business. He noticed that standing side by side, the girls looked remarkably similar. Apparently it's true what they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Looking at them, Rustica felt something familiar, as if they were bound by fate. Sia and Bella missed their older sister very much. 1 week after arriving in Perceta, the heroine met her sisters, whose existence she had been completely unaware of. Sia was not supposed to come here, but the news that Lady Charlotte was coming compelled her to. And Bella also wanted to see her older sister. That's why Sia couldn't come alone. Hayden said that Sia wanted to meet her sister and had to stop Lady Charlotte with utmost care. The Lord wiped Rustica's face after the fight. She yielded without a word. The magic in her eyes had vanished, as if she had dissipated it during the battle. What a tragedy. The spell on her eyes was a simple one, and the Emperor helped her, but with the rest of the enchantments, it was impossible. The heroine grew up alone until she was 14, and suddenly she met her little sisters. Honestly, she was a bit in shock. Worried about her mother's health. What a dilemma. Sia really wanted Rue to go home with them, certain that they would all live together. The hope was palpable. Nothing could be guaranteed yet, but Rustica couldn't lie to the girls. The truth always comes out. However, her godfather declared that this was precisely why he had brought Miss Yennis there. What a revelation. The young woman was happy to meet her sisters, but she still found it hard to think clearly. Utter confusion. Her face revealed that in reality, something very different was worrying her. What mystery was hidden behind that mask, according to Hayden, wherever the Count and Countess went? They always prepared a room for Rustica, saying that their adult daughter needed her own space, worrying about their reunion just like RU. Both the parents and the daughter were very anxious, and that greatly frustrated anyone watching from the outside. Now the protagonist wouldn't be able to hold back. While in the lands of Count Phelas, news unexpectedly arrived that Countess Milenginas was requesting permission to teleport to Belford. Rustica needed time to prepare, however Hayden assured her that everything would be fine. The magical teleporter opened, and from it emerged the lady surprisingly similar to her daughter. There was no doubt that was Rustica's mother, Countess Phelas, the Iron Lady Milenginas. Upon seeing her mother, the girls ran towards her crying inconsolably. Mom! That word the protagonist hadn't uttered in so long. The person she had dreamed of seeing for so long was right there within her grasp. But even knowing this, the girl was unable to take a step forward. From experience, Hayden knew that Miss Jeans had a habit of fleeing. But now, he didn't think she really needed to do something like that. Facing her deepest fears, this was the beginning of the revenge where RU had to act. Ahead lay a path the protagonist had to walk, not wanting to be Rustica the failure forever. Determined not to be that anymore, the intrepid young woman took a step forward towards her destiny. The first thing she did upon seeing her mother was to tell her that she had met her older sister. In that instant, Countess Phelas held her breath. Seeing her daughter before her, now a full-grown woman, their feet carried them towards each other without a second thought, finally uniting. After years of distance, maternal love bound mother and daughter with unbreakable ties. Their connection was more than just kinship. It was a reunion of mother and daughter, both feeling anguish for the same reason. A reunion as painful as the time they were separated, but at the same time a fervent reunion. 1 week after being appointed consul and arriving in Perceta, Ruse met with her mother and sisters, but with her mother at the very epicenter of the war, they couldn't spend much time together. It seems that now Rustica was only left with making a crucial decision regarding her family, whom she had longed for so much, and for so long. The curse from Carlos, because of which the young woman lived through 4 years of torment, and now she knew for certain where she had to go. Upon the heroine's return, Hayden proposed they eat together. Silently, she was gladdened by the meeting with her mother and having sisters. Although it was perhaps too forward, Rustica wanted to know what her parents promised in exchange for bringing her here. However, Hayden didn't bring her to ask for favors from the Count and Countess. Being a less petty emperor than Carlos, Hayden expected nothing in return. According to him, the Count and Countess would be busy, and this fortress as well. In the center, the waves of monsters in the north are regular, but in the west, there were large waves after years of accumulation. For the safety of the children, Hayden planned for this wave of monsters to be difficult to handle. If the emperor deals with the waves in a mediocre way, the nobles will think they are on his level and will remain silent. Rustica was delighted that the Lord took into account the people who were the foundation of the country. To her, such obvious things seemed strange under the influence of Carlos. The Count and Countess, who arrived 11 years ago, were now crucial. The heroine had to choose Ambassador of Genus or Lady Phelas. Rustica never imagined that here she would be Baroness Fairley and Countess of Phelas. The heroine's destiny was sealed. The Count and Countess decided on the small house in Cayet. It doesn't compare to what the Emperor found. It was normal to feel uncomfortable with the woman who saw the Emperor as a one-night stand. Because in reality, this was Lord Hayden's first time. Leaving that behind, Rustica wanted to know what he would do if she stayed in Percet. The Lord was ready to return what was stolen from her by Carlos, including revenge by beheading, but Ru only wanted to break the curse and recover her power as a night mage. A curse so subtly crafted could be fatal to her if handled carelessly. The curse was cunningly linked to all her organs, which meant she could die. The eyes were the starting point of the curse, so it was also easy to remove it after all. Ru had looked Emperor Carlos in the eyes many times before arriving in Perceta. Hayden was convinced that history would repeat itself if Carlos discovered that Miss Genus had lifted the curse and returned. However, now the master could lift the curse from those parts of the body that were far from vital points. It was the only opportunity to compel the young lady to stay in Perceta. The legs were farther from important points than the arms, so it was better to free them. Before completely removing the curse, it was necessary to weaken it. With his unusual power, he managed to weaken the curse, and she saw with her own eyes how the chain broke. The leg definitely felt lighter. The girl felt so much freedom that she wanted to break all her chains immediately. It turned out that the curse on her neck, heart, and head would require much more effort before it could be removed. The Emperor was going to free her right leg when Miss Guinness finished eating. Only one leg was freed, but at that moment, the heroine understood something extremely important. For her freedom, she was sure that being with Hayden was absolutely the right path. Thanks to Rustica's concentration, the Lord managed to remove the curse from the other leg as well. Hayden planned to quickly finish his business in Felis, and then return to Shale. Upon deciding to stay in Felis, Rustica wanted to be with her parents after leaving her post. In that case, His Majesty promised to do everything possible for her resignation. The girl spoke awkwardly about her reliability, which His Highness had spoken of before. She was referring to how she had seduced him to spend a wonderful night together. Hayden understood perfectly. When it was discussed that they should pretend nothing had happened, they were not to disclose it in public, but the Lord could not act as if everything had vanished. The Emperor kept his word, and everything remained a secret, and he intended to keep it that way. But between them, he couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. Whenever Rustica looked at him, he wanted her to remember that night, because Hayden always remembered it, and that was something she simply had to accept. His warmth, his tenderness, the sweet gaze from that night. He treated her so gently that the girl couldn't refuse, and that is another reason why Miss Guinness feared looking him in the eyes, afraid of yielding to temptation. Honestly, Hayden didn't want to force her into anything, but if he leaves it as it is, she will always see him only as the Emperor, and that was his greatest fear. From the beginning, he didn't want that at all. Hayden left and returned, annihilating only the monsters with his devastating power. He no longer has anything to do in Belford, and Rustica decides to return to her parents. She should be happy about reuniting with her family, but now something else troubles her. Hayden occupies all the space in her thoughts, perhaps because it was her first time. With these thoughts, the road home doesn't seem so long, and soon she arrives at the palace. In the courtyard, her father receives her, who has been anxiously awaiting this reunion. This is how Miss Guinness reunites with the family she had lost. Although Hayden took good care of Rustica during her stay in Shale today, was not easy for her. Surely she didn't feel well at the embassy. It's understandable that she fainted. The Count was grateful that Hayden returned their daughter to them. He didn't regret the 1-week wait. A 1-week wait was nothing if it meant a father would see his daughter again. Lord Hayden was going to leave Belford in a bit of a hurry, so the schedule is already tight. He mentioned that today he only managed to remove Ru's curse from 3 specific points. It was directly linked to her life also, to prevent her from ending it recklessly. But the Emperor took full responsibility for removing the curse completely. The curious thing is that the girl herself asked him to remove the curse to take care of Carlos. Besides, as soon as the suppression is over, there will be a victory celebration in Shale, and then the Count of Guinness was made an offer to officially present his daughter. Rustica arrived here as the ambassador of Cayeta, a great stigma in high society, but Hayden ordered her to follow his instructions, promising to accompany her to the banquet at the victory celebration for the achievements of House Guinness. The Emperor will declare himself a partner of Lady Felis, Rustica. The Count was sure that if he presented his daughter now, society would tear her apart in its anger. Ethan rushed too much, so Mylène tried to calm him with all her might, but paternal instincts told him that Hayden looked at his daughter in a special way. In reality, Rustica was 25 years old. She was an independent person, not a child. Her father found it hard to accept that she no longer needed him to sew uniforms or buy swords like before. Now, the parents' task was just to support her so she wouldn't become obsessed with lifting the curse and taking revenge. Ethan wanted to be by her side to make up for lost time and didn't want her to get married. Soon after, Rustica woke up completely disoriented. The first thing the maid did was offer her a glass of water. After the talk with her father, the girl had fainted while crying, but she guessed she hadn't been unconscious for long as the sun was still shining. First, Rustica went to the bathroom to wash off all the dirt from the previous day. Lady Mylène had even prepared all sorts of outfits for her daughter. The dresses were extravagant, but Rustica shared her mother's taste. She chose a light white dress with ruffles, blue ones that enhanced her reddish hair. Everything in the palace was so huge that she barely found the staircase on her way down. The young woman unexpectedly ran into the Emperor himself. Enchanted by her beauty, the master was now glad he had waited for her. Seeing her so beautiful before anyone else, he was so mesmerized by her beauty that he almost forgot to ask how she was feeling. Now Ru felt so relieved that her legs felt heavy. as if she had lost her balance just as Hayden was about to invite her to dinner. The young woman saw her father behind him and ran towards him. Rustica loved the dress her mother had chosen and let her father, the Count, know as much. He turned out to be much more perceptive than Hayden had imagined. Thus the celebration began, for the fortunate return of the Count's eldest daughter. At the table, Hayden declared that Lady Rustica had decided to move to Perceta, and he could not allow her to live on that estate. She was a skilled knight in Khaled, and it would be foolish to waste such a valuable asset in Perceta. The Count was very grateful to him for seeing the potential in his daughter and had no intention of keeping her at home. Suspecting this, the Emperor decided to visit her tomorrow at the Magic Tower. He was going to travel discreetly alone with Rue, leaving everything else to her parents. Originally, the Western Magic Tower was where the Perceta mages learned and researched magic, but hundreds of years ago during a kidnapping incident, the magic and powers of the tower's master were stolen, and the culprit of this crime was none other than the Cayeta Emperor Carlos Arthur Ingram. During this incident, the mistress of the tower suffered serious injuries and all her students were killed as a result. The master of the Magic Tower ceded her position to the Emperor and went to live alone in the destroyed tower. All this led to rumors that the tower has been empty for hundreds of years, and that intruders would be cursed. However, the appearance of the Guardian at Hayden's coronation dispelled the unfounded rumors. After flying a considerable distance, the protagonist could already make out the Magic Tower. Below lay the remains of houses, and the ruins of the surrounding buildings. According to the Emperor, the current owner of the Magic Tower had no intention of rebuilding them. It pained her to see her valuable research destroyed, which is why she hasn't left the tower in centuries. The Emperor partly wanted her consent to restore the tower, and to check on how she was doing. Rustica was the heir of Felas, and a man destroyed them both, even though they were very different. When the wave of monsters stabilizes, and the noble family establishes itself, people will start to arrive. The heroine was sure that the Count would find it difficult to govern a shaky state, and would need help. As they approached, the tower emitted a positive signal welcoming them. Fortunately, Icarus descended slowly and made a perfect landing. The appearance of a gentleman took them by surprise, suddenly interrupting the Emperor. After emerging from the bushes, Sir Roderick hurriedly declared that the Magic Tower was too large. Sir Roderick Callahan was a mage, and was currently assisting the owner of the Magic Tower. Upon seeing Miss Janes, the young man couldn't believe he had found the famous defender of Cayeta, since he knew that nickname. It wasn't hard for Rue to guess that he was a member of the Imperial Knights. Roderick was a second-class knight in the Imperial Order, and for him it was an honor to meet the Cayeta Knight. However, he didn't expect that the Consul of Cayeta he was waiting for would also be Lady Janes, but now Rustica didn't want to do anything that would remotely benefit Cayeta. According to Roderick, there are still many people here who cannot forget their past in Cayeta and want to return. However, most of the materials had been lost, so the Cayeta mages left disappointed. To start, the heroes entered a magical teleportation circle that led to the upper floors. All of this was new to Rue, but she was ready to teleport upstairs. Just before seeing the owner of the tower, Hayden suddenly excused himself and asked her to wait. So as not to waste time, the heroine asked Roderick to tell her the story of Perceta and its guardians. He knew that originally Perceta and Cayeta were a single country with 5 guardians. These sages protected each region. The sage of the east was the Lord of Dragons. The one of the west was the master of the tower, and the central ruler was traditionally the Emperor of Perceta from the beginning. In recent centuries, because of Carlos Ingram, some guardian positions became vacant. After proclaiming himself emperor, he killed the emperor and wiped out the royal family, interrupting the guardian's lineage. The Lord of Dragons rebelled and exiled Carlos, leaving the throne vacant, awaiting the guardian's return. Afterward, Carlos returned to the conquered lands, and a barrier was raised. Thus, the Empire of Cayeta was born. As for the last guardian, the southern one, she was Lady Rustica. Carlos, the founder of the Cayeta Empire, was a southern sage, but he created it through robbery, murder, and theft, and she was born surrounded by a barrier protected with her own life without even knowing it. These are lands created through theft and born in the middle of a barrier. Rustica couldn't believe that the story of how Carlos stole everything and raised the barrier was true. Upon arriving in Perceta, the young woman had heard that Carlos had raised a wall, but she took it as a rumor. Honestly, she already doubted the Lord's actions even in Cayeta, and it was all because the barrier was Carlos's protection, something he would never have crossed. Now the reason why Miss Janes was banished from Cayeta was clear. In her youth, Rustica had dared to ask the Emperor to cross the wall, and was stripped of her powers, exiled, and she lost everything. Now everything was clear. She was not to blame for any of her misfortunes. It was simple bad luck, truly awful luck. Soon Hayden gave Miss Janes permission to enter, and she had the opportunity to meet the owner of the tower. The Emperor introduced Ophelia Quintaleta Lisha, the guardian of the tower who had transferred its control to him. Rustica introduced herself with such modesty it was almost chivalrous. Offering the young woman a cup of tea, Ophelia noted that Carlos had become more scrupulous. At that moment, the Western Guardian touched her head, and the heroine felt the magical chains on her. It was quite terrifying. Carlos used Ophelia's abilities well after snatching them from her. It was truly horrible and disgusting, so much so that Rue didn't even want to look at him. The time had come for Ophelia to return to the post of sage, now that Hayden had ascended to the throne. The barrier opened, and Lady Rustica returned to Perceta. Whether one liked it or not, the world had changed radically. If it was an offer to return to her post, the lady flatly refused. The reason was that she had been exhausted and powerless for a long time. The same thing that is now happening to Lady Rustica, which is why she fled. Even if Ophelia fled, nothing would change, so she quietly waited for her death. As for Miss Jane's, if there was a chance she planned to take it, according to the Western Guardian, lifting the curse would take a long time, and there was a possibility of never removing it. However, as long as Rustica had a hand to hold a sword, and the strength to wield it, that was enough for her. Then the lady understood everything that was the path His Majesty had chosen. Unable to hide her situation any longer, Ophelia Quintaleth proposed they inspect the tower. The magic tower was completely empty, the work of Carlos Ingram. He stole all the priceless magic books, ancient texts, and research and burned everything else. The place remained abandoned until the lady's disciples tidied it up. Moreover, other artifacts besides the books were taken. Carlos took everything from here to build his empire, and he still does so using the power of the Western Sage. The Cayeta Emperor not only cast a curse, but also drained the strength of the defenseless Ophelia Quintaleth and Rustica Janes. They were used by him. The scars accumulated over a long period of use were deeply embedded in this space. There were countless important artifacts here: the Sword of Isar, the Staff of Nanaki, the Necklace of Belen. Suddenly, Rustica asked to be allowed to return to the embassy. She was going to teach that cheap thief what it feels like to be robbed. Consul Genesis returned to the Cayeta embassy 3 days after the theft. She needed to return to Cayeta urgently, so she asked Aldwin for help. Rue had to immediately inform the Emperor about the situation. It concerned the Perceta army. It was difficult to explain in detail, but she had to return at once to report. If the Emperor of Perceta finds out that she knows everything, the irreparable will happen in the end. Aldwin decided to help by eliminating any risk of her being tracked. He gave her a magic stone, created by the Emperor of Cayeta, guaranteed security using teleportation. Rustica left Perceta in the young man's hands and departed. The heroine teleported so suddenly that she startled everyone with her presence. But the image of Hayden still haunted her. Behind her back, his ideal type of woman is one who secretly plots revenge. They shouldn't be discovered, so Rue begged him not to say anything. Rustica Genesis made a statement requesting an audience with His Majesty upon seeing the girl's unexpected return. Carlos assumed that she had discovered Perceta's secrets in the last few days by being close to the Emperor of Perceta. She discovered several secrets. First, the scale of his Western knights and troops under the command of the Emperor was much larger. They all flew on creatures resembling magical monsters, and their numbers were countless. The aristocrats are only interested in maintaining their own status and expanding their territories. They are accustomed to the Emperor's absence since his birth. So Carlos was sure of it. And another secret Rustica discovered was what the Emperor revealed to her. According to Hayden, a new guardian has emerged in the south. Then the Emperor ordered the young woman to return in 4 hours, giving her time to rest comfortably. She feared Carlos would notice that part of the curses had dissipated, but everything went well. It was probably because Hayden had cast illusion magic on Miss Genesis before she arrived here. There were no guards, so Rustica decided to take the opportunity to sneak away. But at the worst possible moment, a knight followed her, so they ended up going together. Carlos acted faster than expected and ordered his men to activate the magic circle. Since Carlos wasn't there, the protagonist decided to start taking action as well. While the knight crept slowly behind her, Rustica suddenly turned the corner, and just as he went after her to stop her, the brave woman landed a punch on his face. Hayden, who appeared suddenly, was surprised to see her rummaging through the poor guy's things. The girl undressed the man and ordered the Emperor to change his clothes. Since he decided not to just watch it, would be best to disguise himself as someone from Cayeta. Now he had to cover his body and legs, as well as hide his face so as not to attract attention. They could be in danger at any moment, so it was good that Hayden was protecting her. While the owner is away, they had to recover what was stolen and completely wreck his house. It turned out that the entrance to the archive with secret knowledge was heavily guarded, but Rustica's skills were still magnificent, so she cleverly took care of the guard. Inside the archive, there used to be guards everywhere, so the heroes decided to hide. There were no guards at the entrance, so Rue decided to circle the perimeter and infiltrate. Upon seeing 2 guards, the girl knew she only had one chance. First, she took out one by plunging a sharp knife into his chest. Without wasting time, Rustica pounced on the mage to complete her plan. She missed the first strike, so she had to finish him off on the second attempt. The noise attracted unnecessary attention, and she could have done it silently. She couldn't stay, so she decided to lure the guards inside and take care of them. The guards were persistent, and Rustica found herself alone against 6 warriors. Before she could devise a plan, a devastating attack from outside eliminated one of them. It all happened so fast, he simply couldn't hold back. Hayden's blood boiled seeing his beloved, surrounded by so many men. That was the trigger, the precise moment the Imperial Guard pounced on them. In the midst of the attack, Rustica unfortunately dropped her sword and was left defenseless while on the other side of the hall with Hayden distracted. A knight attacked him by surprise. Fortunately, the heroine found a makeshift weapon and protected the Perceta Emperor. Without even suspecting it, Rue's contraption generated a shockwave that knocked down the Imperial Guard. The young woman had only picked up a staff that was lying nearby, but it turned out to be more powerful than she imagined. Now she found it hard to believe that this object had taken care of all the guards, and even so, Hayden had never asked her to protect him at all. Being a former knight, Rustica felt the duty and loyalty to protect him. The Emperor looked at the young woman with such passion, realizing that he had fallen in love again. But now their main task was to find the artifacts that seemed to be identical. The scepter that Rue found was the most valuable thing there and had a special name. When they finally gathered all the artifacts, the Emperor suddenly heard a noise outside. Judging by the sound, it seemed they would soon be discovered. There was no time to talk, so Rustica decided to get them out of there as quickly as possible. Behind one of the walls in the palace hallway, there had to be a place to hide. By applying a simple strike with the scepter, the young woman managed to open the entrance to a secret place. There they were safe, so the heroine proposed taking a breather before moving on. She once saw Carlos come out of there, and that's how she realized there was something behind the wall. But looking around, she couldn't understand what they were seeing. The secret chamber was filled with instruments of torture, covered in blood. One could only imagine what Carlos did in there. But the most horrendous thing, what shocked the heroes, were enormous containers with children inside. Seeing a small tortured and crippled body, Rue couldn't believe a human was capable of such a thing. On behalf of the Perceta Empire, Hayden expressed his deepest gratitude. Thanks to Miss Genesis, they managed to find the bodies of the missing royals. What the Empress was witnessing now was the most terrible and shameful event in Perceta's history, and also the most intense humiliation of feeling impossible to shake off. When the others found out what had happened, they could barely believe that something like this was possible. With a joint effort, Hayden and Rustica found those who had disappeared long ago. They are the children that remained. Unfortunately, they couldn't find the others. Of the 47 who disappeared, only 5 children returned as corpses. Or rather, not 5, but 6, including Hayden, who returned alive. Their funerals would be organized later, and in the meantime, the Lord proposed looking at the artifacts. Rustica didn't manage to find the imperial crown, but she did get the scepter. It is a magnificent treasure with which several of Rue's curses can be lifted, and moreover, Miss Genesis brought a belt. She didn't know what it was, but it was kept next to the scepter. With tears in her eyes, Lady Ophelia grabbed the belt and clutched it tightly to herself. Closing her eyes, the force emanating from the treasure was consuming Carlos's curse. Determined to seize the opportunity to break a curse, Hayden got to work. It was unthinkable. Ophelia was being consumed by a magic capable of saving her. After a while, the green tail finally reacted and Ophelia improved noticeably. At last, one of the curses that had bound the Guardian for years was eliminated. The treasure that Ophelia cherished so much was called Star of the Western Sky, a symbol of her power. Carlos used the power of the scepter and the Star of the Western Sky to curse the Guardian, which is why Hayden was able to break the curse under the influence of the Star of the Western Sky. In addition, Rustica took a spherical artifact, a pearl necklace, and a ring from there. In their day, they were symbols of Carlos, but by stealing the Emperor's symbols, he no longer needed them. Renouncing all the artifacts, Lady Rustica left to submit her resignation, giving a bow. Only Hayden and Ophelia knew that in reality, the artifacts belonged to Miss Genesis. When Hayden wanted to destroy them, a sinister sound suddenly erupted from the pearl. That sound meant that Carlos had realized his treasures were gone, and apparently, he had already found the culprit who dared to deceive him in such a way. Without wasting time, the protagonist did not hesitate to write to the Emperor, asking for her resignation. She believed it would be accepted, as she hadn't written a single word that would insult him. Even if it was just a little, her body felt lighter after the curse dissipated. Being able to move and wield a sword gave the young warrior hope. She decided to return to Phalis the next day, when suddenly she felt a presence behind her. The surprise paralyzed Rustica, who couldn't escape. Someone grabbed her forcefully. No one dared to deceive the great Emperor Cayeta, and now his fury was uncontrollable. In his rage, he tightened his grip on the young woman's neck, lifting her off the ground. In that instant, a magical force enveloped the Emperor like a rope. Breaking his momentum, the Lord was thrown with force and fell roughly to the ground. The astute Salvador knew that the Emperor would fall, was obsessed with his own honor. Hayden was disappointed that Carlos had neither honor nor dignity. Threatening and harassing a bound knight was not part of the Emperor's honor, but according to Carlos, that was better than what Hayden did, breaking in like a thief. Thanks to Hayden, his knight had misbehaved, but the Lord still knew very little about Lady Rustica. It was precisely due to Emperor Cayeta's misunderstanding that he could not become the Emperor of Perceta. Ophelia could not miss the moment when fate punished the great fool Carlos Ingram. Carlos thought she would remain locked up forever in that dump, crawling miserably, but Ophelia could walk and planned to make the Cretan, who didn't even know how to use the stolen power, regret it. It was not strange that all those who had unknowingly served him turned their backs on him upon arriving here. Carlos believed the reason was that those insignificant people were feeding them absurd tales. However, he tried to blame them when he himself had suspected Lady Rustica as soon as she appeared. A shiver ran through his body at the mere thought of Lady Rustica choosing Perceta, and its emperor, not Carlos. He couldn't believe it was true, thinking the girl wouldn't be capable of doing something like that. His desperate tone and reaction seemed like those of someone betrayed by the one they trusted most. Seeing Emperor Cayeta that way was repulsively disgusting. Not once did he think about the pain and disappointment that Rue suffered under his command. The protagonist was just a pawn, and seeing him act as if he were in pain was disgusting. Carlos was convinced that Hayden was threatening his knight, but in reality he helped Rue. He allowed her to see her parents and gave her a title, and most importantly is lifting. Gradually the curse that Carlos placed upon her certain that if he had wanted to, he would have done it long ago. Rustica threw the letter in his face. That is why no one from Cayeta decided to return. Nobody wanted to recognize a thief as emperor. These accusations affected the Lord so much that he immediately subjected the girl to an attack with his magical power. According to Ophelia, if the girl resists any further, her body will not withstand it. Hayden took matters into his own hands, ordering Ophelia to cast the elimination spell. He wanted to end this conversation and proposed to Carlos, to cross the barrier again and steal everything anew if he was not content. And furthermore, he should collect his resignation before leaving. Something he would not forgive anyone for. The ruthless Emperor Cayeta vanished, and with him silence finally reigned in the hall. For the first time, Rustica finally defied the emperor she had served. Her words clearly unsettled him, and in the end he was expelled in dishonor. His facial expression in the last moment was undoubtedly her first victory over him. The heroine finally defeated her master who had chained and deceived her. The resounding victory became the other side of the coin. For the young Miss Jeans, the wound on her neck from Carlos's hands was quite serious. The healing will take time, and in the meantime she will have to be treated with medication. Rustica did not intervene much as it was her own affair, but Hayden was still furious. He was simply very worried that she would suffer and he would arrive late. The guilt fell upon his shoulders as he considered himself the one responsible for protecting Miss Jeans. It would be much better if the girl could defend herself, but for now she is under his protection. To tell the truth, Hayden saw in her a determination, capable of giving her the strength to personally behead Carlos. He had never seen a resignation like that. Rue was burning with the desire to take revenge on Carlos. Having made her decision no matter what happened, Hayden planned to get rid of the curse imposed upon her. Since part of Ophelia's curses had been lifted, my lady could also remove hers. However, considering her current situation, this will be difficult. Carlos struck a vital point. In her state of shock, Rue could not put herself to the test. The emperor was not just worried. Many things troubled him, but not like this. However, the girl was one of those who pressed forward without losing a second, but the Lord had no time to linger either. Her heart was racing. His words had a strong impact, and the heroine found it difficult to calm her inner turmoil. The emperor's words were sincere without even a trace of a joke. Rustica felt the depth of their meaning, although it was not only because of the words. Even before she felt everything that was happening with just a touch. How much Hayden worries, how much he regrets not being able to protect her, how much he values her. He no longer hides his emotions, which were becoming impossible to ignore. Shameless expressions that blurred the lines they should maintain. The heroine knew it, but could not look him in the eyes. Because as long as Carlos's green shadow haunts her, she will feel she is using Hayden's emotions. She needed to borrow his strength, until the curse was broken. In the end, it is only a one-sided affection that she will not be able to reciprocate. In the evening at night, Hayden went to see Ophelia to see how she was doing. For him to come at such an hour made it clear to the lady that he needed something. Tomorrow before leaving the tower, he wanted to eliminate part of Rustica's curse, and he needed help. Not being fully recovered, Ophelia suggested that he ask for help from the Lord of Dragons. Nevertheless, even a little help from the Western Guardian would be enough for Hayden. The artifacts will not help against Rustica's curses imposed with a power accumulated over centuries. That meant that after leaving the position of sage, Carlos used the power of each newborn heir, the heirs of the Southern Guardian, whom they were never able to find, must have been born and died there. It was like that until Lady Rustica appeared in Perceta. With warmth and longing, Hayden recalled how he met her. She herself found him when the Lord was still a foolish boy and a clumsy warrior. Rustica, like the sun, illuminated his life. The great betrayal and theft by Carlos in the past occurred hundreds of years ago. This took place over 7 years, during which he plundered the imperial treasures and the riches of the magic tower. In addition, he eliminated the adult members of the royal family and kidnapped the young royal members. As a result, 47 royal children disappeared. 430 years later, only 5 of them returned as corpses, and among them, a single survivor, Hayden Constant Ristana Beller. The entire empire honored the memory of Albert Udric Valor and Lady Rosen Valor, daughter and son of the Duke of Lemberg. When ashes and shadows covered the white city, the sun and the moon wept. Louisa Olga Leslie, daughter of Count Mile, Clarissa Tira Magnus, daughter of Duke Guienne, Richard Alexander Belor, son of the Grand Duke Belua, all of them were gone forever. Seeing the golden hair of those children brought Rustica vague memories of Hayden, a boy with a pale face and dirty blonde hair, cut unevenly, who looked at her with dead eyes. Now that boy bids farewell to all the missing in the name of the last survivor. The heroine did not know where he had been, or what he had done until his golden hair turned black, along with the curiosity in her soul. Ruth felt sorry for him. When 5 children's corpses were returned, the empire shuddered and Hayden decided to end the conquest as quickly as possible. Now Sir Simon was running through the city as if his feet were on fire. Hayden was supposed to have checked on the girl this morning, but was slightly delayed. Then the master told her about his plans to lift the curses in the near future. However, Ophelia was certain that it was dangerous. to lift the curses related to the head. Still, lifting too many or too few curses might not turn out well. Carlos had bound the girl so securely to the point that Ophelia wondered how she would behave when it was all removed. I'm glad to see Miss Jean's full of energy. The guardian decided to remove some of her curses. As soon as Hayden held Ruth more tightly, the lady began to recite the magical renunciation spell. The curse was intertwined in her tendons and bones. The closer to the heart, the more difficult it was to eliminate. With every fiber of her being, Ophelia fought against those infernal knots rooted in the girl, pushing her power to the absolute maximum. Rustica felt an unbearable pain course through her entire being. Fortunately, it was all over in an instant, and the girl was fine again. The curse around the eyes was loose, and the ones on her legs being at the extremity of the body were weaker, as Ophelia had said. The closer it gets to the heart, the stronger its hold becomes. That is why they had to recover the power that Carlos stole to eliminate it once and for all. Not even a month had passed since they met, and they had already done so many things together. The heroes just had to move forward together from now on. Hayden promised to be by her side. A strange sensation invaded the heroine. Her body had lost its balance depending on how he responds. Her body would thus change its strategy. Hayden offered to help so they could go to the next ball together, as the daughter of Count Felis Rustica had to mingle with high society. The Emperor did not yet plan to make her a knight, although she would love that lately the heroine has been dedicated to breaking the curse, so revenge is her priority. But if Rue keeps thinking about that bastard, she will have no room left for Hayden. Her constant thoughts about Carlos hurt the master's heart. Hatred and affection are two sides of the same coin, despite her convictions. Rustica was not going to the ball. She needed time to break the curse. It was too soon to join the Imperials. A long road awaited her. In reality, the Emperor was willing to help the girl get her revenge and join the Imperials, but in that case, he wanted the damsel to look at him, and was even willing to undress. It seems the Emperor will go to the ball alone, and will not be able to marry after losing his purity, but Rustica rejected him and told him to look for a better lady than her. Those words did not push Hayden away. They only prompted him to hug her tighter. The master waited for her for so long, remembering her smile every moment. He could not marry another, so he dreamed that Rustica would take responsibility for him. Soon the time came to leave for Chalea, and our heroes were ready. But Sia and Bella, determined, also prepared to go with them, and not let go of their sister. Seeing them, Hayden tried to explain that Rustica had business to attend to in Chalea, but the girls were willing to do anything to go with their older sister and their godfather. Sia got so excited that she ran to hug her older sister, so she wouldn't abandon them. The girls could no longer let her go. They dreamed of living together. Rustica had to leave, so the Count and Countess supported the little ones. After saying goodbye to her father, the heroine promised to see him in 3 days at the national funeral. Holding the girl tightly, the Emperor took responsibility for her safety. Icarus flapped his wings and soared. It was time to return to Zalea. It turned out that Icarus couldn't imagine how difficult it would be for Rue, where all the aristocrats would gather, but she had her father and her mother, who were capable of supporting her properly. For the first time in a long time, Rue was no longer alone. Her family was always close. Shortly, Chalea was flooded with the news that the Emperor had finished the expedition and was returning. People couldn't believe he had finished with the West so quickly. High society should not have underestimated him just because of his youth. In that instant, the wings of magical beasts cut through the air. The Imperials appeared in the sky. Near the ground, shouts of joy were heard. The people wished long life to His Majesty. Nothing happened during his absence. Otherwise, he would have been notified immediately. The state funeral followed protocol. The priests take care of the bodies, and every morning there is a service. Simon wanted to know if the Emperor planned to let Lady Rustica stay at the palace during the funeral. Rue didn't need such formalities. She simply had to be near Hayden, teleporting to the palace. Hayden decided to display all the collected artifacts. Suru personally raided the palace's treasure vault. Katat, seeing that even the Count Palatine is fascinated. It can be said that they are truly remarkable treasures. Suddenly, Simon noticed that the Lord should not have treated Lady Rustica as his own. In other words, the Emperor should not address a lady whose identity has not been revealed as his own in an official act. In that case, Hayden declared a war where men would fight for Rustica's heart. And of course, he considered himself the sole victor for every 5 members of the family who managed to return. A 10-day mourning period was declared. But even during the mourning period, journalists carried out their duty. They presented the sensational news of the sudden change of Consul of Cayeta. For Aldwin, it was evident that Emperor Perceta had something to do with it. He saw perfectly how Hayden dragged Rustica everywhere. The press even wrote that he squeezed her dry. However, Eliza believed that Lady Rustica was an adult capable of making her own decisions. It infuriated the boy that the Emperor only made an announcement about the dismissal of Miss Guinness and appointed Aldwin Rochester as the new consul. Rustica made her decision, and His Majesty understood. The Lord couldn't believe this was possible, as he knew a different girl. Rustica left and Alwyn became the ambassador of Cayeta, so Eliza's task was clear from the beginning. Her target was the shadow, the one that would reveal the traitor. The news that Lady Rustica Janes found the bodies of 5 members of the royal family was shocking. Everything that Eliza needed now was an order from His Majesty. The news in the newspaper reached Rustica, and Hayden couldn't wait to see her reaction. Thanks to him, The girl became a target for everyone in the Kayeta Empire and couldn't leave the palace. Still, she didn't expect the emperor to give her such honors for finding the bodies. But now, the most important thing for the master was whether her bed was comfortable and if she liked the food. He learned from a lady that guests should be received with caution, although Hayden was secured with the money she had gotten from selling the bear he captured. Remembering that the girl declared that she now had nothing left. In the forest cabin were all her savings. It was her home. In that case, the master decided to go and recover what originally belonged to Rue. The heroine had not been away from home for long. But what they saw took them both by surprise. Everything in the cabin looked as if a bear that knew how to use the door had entered. Apparently, they cleaned everything thoroughly inside. However, the girl was more worried about the children. The woman who taught them to read and write disappeared, and then horrible guys broke in, wrecking the house. It seems that Rue had already resigned herself to her home where she lived for years, having this deplorable appearance, assuming there was no one else there. The protagonist decided to leave that place. However, Hayden did not follow her immediately, preferring to inspect the area a little. The surroundings did not suggest that Kayeta had used any kind of magic on this site. Walking cautiously through the birch forest, Rustica calculated each step to find the exact spot. Upon reaching a specific tree, she asked Hayden to hand her the shovel. As her master, he simply forgot. He took on the task of digging up the hidden treasure. He wasn't going to dig with his own hands, but would use the magical powers that reside in his hands. In this way, the heroine finally got her gold bars that she missed so much. Additionally, just in case she exchanged a couple of bars for precious gems. There were so few bars that the emperor didn't believe they would use Rue for such little pay. She had nothing else. Although insufficient greed could also be a problem, but the heroine considered herself greedy. Nothing matched her desire to kill the emperor. Aside from that, she dreamed of living with her family, something she couldn't do for a long time. In reality, she saw herself as shy and sensitive, not as good as she appeared. Still, as a knight, she gave her rations to the hungry night children and suppressed her envy. It turns out that she even forgot that she promised not to send him to the battlefield. It seems the Lord was the only one who remembered what had happened between them. Seeing the disappointment in his eyes, Rustica justified herself by saying she was absorbed in her problems. Perhaps she forgot the details, but she still remembered that blonde boy. In that case, Hayden hoped she would remember some conversation with him. In reality, the protagonist didn't forget him, but rather how she used to be. That time when everything was fine seemed so distant, almost unreal. For a second, Rue thought the cause was the curse on her head. However, in front of Hayden, she could be as confident and shameless as she wanted. The important thing is that he remembered everything and complained like a child, demanding an apology. If Rustica kept looking at him like that, the emperor promised she would remember everything. After all, he doesn't have a face that is easily forgotten. They had nothing else to do there, so they decided to return after all. Hayden swore he could get in and out without any problems. However, Rustica was adamantly opposed. The diplomatic situation was tense because of him. Ignoring her opinion, the emperor still thought he should visit Carlos, considering how he appeared. Suddenly, the Kayeta emperor at the embassy. There's surely magic there. Without even giving her time to respond, the girl just wanted to say that they shouldn't create problems now, and if a war starts, Rue won't even be able to contribute. She was waiting for the chance to decapitate Carlos. In that case, the Lord agreed to start the war after lifting most of the curses. After their conversation, Hayden took the girl to the garden to give her something, as if he had eyes in the back of his head. He noticed she wanted to say something and told her not to hold back. The heroine thought it was too much, but she still dared to ask. She longed to know Hayden's age, but that question put him on the spot. 430 years had passed since the children's remains returned. He too was taken then to Lord Constant. They kidnapped him when he was a child. He was 13 years old. And upon waking, he was in the laboratory that Rustica found behind Kayeta's treasure vault. Then he slept again, as if time had stopped, and upon waking, he was before the Great Barrier as a knight. So 400 years passed with his growth temporarily halted during his sleep. They met when the seasons had changed 8 times. Hayden was 15 and Rue was 17. That bastard used people as disposable tools, but his age was not suitable for war, yet Rustica did not hide her joy that the Lord had survived. She cared about the age of the men she liked. He could be older or younger. Hayden suddenly remembered that after the mourning period, the funerals would be held. And he wanted all the members of House Yennis to be there. Rustica had entered the imperial family, and as part of House Yennis she had to attend. But more importantly, the Lord unexpectedly asked her to sit down. Today he wanted to give her a gift, a present he had prepared just for her. Flashy jewelry cannot be worn to funerals, or anything gaudy, but pearls were acceptable. And besides, Hayden had enchanted the earrings with a spell to help break the curse and protect her. Upon seeing such beauty, the protagonist smiled widely, and a blush rose to her cheeks. It turned out that the emperor had them made with pearls that Rue had brought with her own hands. It was in a way compensation for the money she had left for Hayden at the embassy. He was flattered that the girl liked the earrings, as she had never had anything like them. Now that he knew what she liked, he promised to make sure she had more than enough with him. The protagonist could be honest. The master wanted to know everything she liked. The memories of that night of madness assailed her just now, giving her another memory to hold on to. The emperor felt blissful. So as not to avoid Hayden, the girl became curious about what else he remembered of her. The master remembered everything, even things Rustica might have forgotten. After this, the emperor decided to end the meeting and promise to see each other again. The beat of her heart, like the rustle of the wind, was the only sound Rue heard in that instant. Even nobles from the east and west gathered with the citizens. On the day of the funeral for the 5 royals who returned, it was rumored that the consul of Cayeta would attend the ceremony, but no one knew if it was the current one or the former one. It was said that the people of Cayeta had completely settled in the west, which they considered a vulgarity. Unlike the Easterners, these people only knew how to wield swords, and they intended to rule the territory. Suddenly silence fell over the hall. His Majesty Emperor Perceta Hayden Constant had arrived. Rustica never imagined that the sages would participate in this event at the funeral. Both guardians of the East and West followed Hayden. Although the nobility's opinions were divided, the sages continued to offer their support. Soon the ceremony began. There is no greater sorrow than the memory of joy and present sadness. The tenuous thread between the world and the heavens was broken. 5 deceased children were bid farewell forever. May eternal peace be with them, and upon them eternal peace and the blessing of God. Rustica tried to understand what it feels like to lose everyone who was ever by her side. And after the horror she lived through, she tries to survive completely alone. The young woman could not imagine how much that pain burned her heart. During the event, she unexpectedly heard a familiar voice. Sir Keika was happy to see Lady Rustica Falaska again. He had heard that the conquest of the West was a success, and wanted to know if everything was all right. Suddenly, Elisa interrupted their conversation, and Rue had to stop. It turned out the Lord Emperor was urgently awaiting the arrival of Miss Yennis, so she was forced to bid a polite farewell and withdraw with a curtsy. All this time, Hayden waited patiently for his chosen one, lost in his thoughts. Upon seeing Rustica, a carefree smile lit up his face and his eyes sparkled. Although it was Miss Yennis's first event thanks to the Emperor, she was calm. Hayden always said it, but she looks spectacular. And today she drew all the attention not only when the heroine was silent, but also when she spoke. She was incredibly elegant. She was so magnificent that Hayden found it difficult to resist. But now they had to go somewhere, so he invited the girl to accompany him. However, before accepting, the heroine made a face that showed concern. If the lady felt uncomfortable with him, the emperor just wanted to know the truth. In reality, he was not ready for that, but he promised to do everything possible so she would not feel that way. Rustica was not sure if such a conversation was appropriate at a funeral, but she still did not understand why the emperor had become so interested in such an ordinary person as herself. The truth was that Hayden had always dreamed of marrying his first love, but of course he was not making a formal proposal now, and he was not going to force Miss Yennis. But the Lord had no intention of giving up either in any case. It was time to go as they had already kept someone waiting. The guardians of the West and East were already awaiting their arrival, and upon seeing Rue, Ophelia was very happy. However, the Lord, whose attention was fixed exclusively on the ambassador, was suspiciously silent. The Lord made the young lady feel uncomfortable when he looked at her like that. Ophelia almost forgot to introduce the Dragon Lord, who for a long time protected this country from the East. The Lord was pleased to meet Miss Yennis and asked to simply be called Melpheus. Ophelia remembered all those children. They were weak from birth and the smallest, which is why they died like that, as if they simply fell asleep in the laboratory. It was a peaceful death. Melpheus blamed himself for not having been able to use enough force to protect them. All he was capable of doing was dragging people across the Great Barrier for 400 years. Rustica remembered that back then many people and knights kidnapped from Cayeta were brought here. She was stunned to hear that during that time the Lord had sent 100,000 people to the wall. The girl knew very different things about those who returned here to Cayeta. The members of their army who crossed the barrier turned into magical creatures. They even said they had transformed into horrible monsters. The heroine could not imagine that they were not magical creatures, but people. Worrying was useless. Carlos always mastered magic and illusion according to Hayden. That is why such a difficult barrier to overcome was created. Carlos just wanted to make sure that no one could leave his domain. Moreover, Melpheus knew that Miss Yennis wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but Hayden intervened and asked him to attend to the man they brought. And since they were talking about it, the emperor asked the master to look at Rustica's curse. Since the last time Melpheus saw the curse, it had become more subtle and complex, and Carlos had become very skilled at handling the stolen power. This curse was more treacherous and cruel than the one placed on the mistress of the tower. Lady Rustica probably understood, but the Dragon Master could not touch Ophelia's curse. The coward Carlos made sure that Melpheus could not break any of his curses. The heroine was only curious, but she never imagined that the truth hid something like this. Still now, everything could be different, so the Lord took a risk and tried something with magic. He created a fire dragon and sent it straight towards the lady. When the magical tongues of fire touched her body, Rue could not stand and fell onto Hayden. Melpheus could not stop it, nor could he even undo the curse. However, he damaged it, weakening it in some way, and that was crucial. Thanks to the Lord being the Empire's last line of defense, they were able to get this far. Rue believed that the cracked curse would break sooner or later. Thanking the Lord for his attempt, Lady Yennis left the hall, and then Melpheus wondered what Hayden planned to do with Carlos's heir now. The balance had been broken, pushing them forward, regardless of the methods or the means. Ophelia suddenly declared that the process of lifting the curse on the traitor's heir had to be accelerated. They had gone through so many difficulties to bring her here, they could not allow her to die, Hayden. He was sure that would be a loss for all of them. In any case, the Lord wanted to go back to sleep. He didn't need to be awake with the Emperor there. Despite being the old man and dreaming of retirement, Hayden planned to work him to death. He had so much work that perhaps he would soon need to wake the sovereign. Therefore, the master ordered him not to expect much of a restful sleep. Meanwhile, away from prying eyes, Elisa was waiting for information on where my lady was staying. But she was hidden very well. It was impossible to get close to her. No one knows where Rustica is, and if they do, they won't say a word. All they could do was wait. After all, they were already used to it. Rumors were spreading that the Empire was trying to turn the funeral into a monster subjugation party, so Elisa decided to find out the traitor's whereabouts. To fulfill the Emperor's order, and until then the lady hiding her identity under a hood, decided to retreat and blended into the crowd. Upon her return to the palace, Rustica was greeted with joy, and a splendid breakfast awaited her. She couldn't have bread for breakfast as usual, because today her lord was waiting for her. Bowing, the girl greeted the son of the Empire as everyone did to Hayden. However, he didn't care what others did as long as they didn't violate the imperial order, or else he was going to show what it means to always be the exception. At breakfast, the heroine shared that she couldn't move at all before, but now she trained every day. They had just removed the curse from her, but if she trained as she did before, Hayden would be worried. He didn't like Rue's approach to matters at all, but then the girl told him to propose his own. Since Rue needed to train anyway, he proposed training at night alone. Rustica was so embarrassed by these words that she suggested eating first. Always ready to help, Hayden sometimes needed her, but he wanted to see her always. What the girl implied by the word needs was different from what he implied. Miss Jeans was referring to a purely formal sense, while the Emperor meant a deeply personal one. From how casually Hayden said these things, it was clear he was quite a player. But even knowing that, Rue felt a frantic beating in her chest for some reason. By the way, there was one thing the girl taught him that night. Pay attention to the conditions that arise when choosing a romantic partner. How interesting. The girl was perplexed to hear that he in fact met several conditions. First, the lady liked attractive men, and she had told Hayden so many times. The alcohol made Rue a little more honest, and she told him he was handsome in both face and body. She also mentioned that the young man kissed very well, and that she liked kissing him. The Lord was saving his first time for someone special, but Rue took it from him and acted as if nothing had happened. There was no better way to describe his feelings. The lady up and left him. Anyway, Hayden hoped she wasn't thinking of sleeping with the first person who crossed her path. But Rustica had already escaped that foolish life, and her answer saved many lives. The Emperor did not like to share at all, especially when it came to people. What he hated most in the world was the idea of sharing his beloved with another man. It seems he was truly willing to kill anyone who dared to desire his lady, and if the protagonist became curious, she could always put him to the test. Except for that, Hayden is an open and decent person, although people who are called decent, by Rustica's standards, are quite rare. In that case, the Lord supposed he hadn't been good enough that night. From the moment they kissed until they bowed their heads together, Rue repeated it many times, especially when he held her by the waist. She said many times how good it felt. Now that the meal was over, it seemed the Emperor had to return to his duties. However, he had already finished his duties and wanted to take their relationship to the next level. After the informal part, Hayden wanted to exchange gifts and set the wedding date. Rustica did not consider herself a suitable option as a noble lady. Impeccable! That's why the Emperor couldn't even get angry with her and wanted to judge her flaws himself. If he hadn't proven his worth enough, he promised to try even harder. His gift was a surprise so that Rue would stop looking for non-existent flaws in herself. Upon seeing the jewel, the heroine was convinced it had belonged to Emperor Perceta. According to Hayden, he had altered the bracelet, and now the girl had the chance to wear it at the banquet. The Lord dreamed of being her partner at the banquet in honor of the successful conquest of the Western lands. With all his might, he was trying to prove that no one in Perceta surpassed him. Rustica reluctantly agreed, since the Emperor could strengthen her and her family, but she flatly refused to accept something that belonged to that bastard. Asking for trust, Hayden claimed to have perfected the bracelet. Knowing that Rue was impatient, the Emperor had no choice but to moderate his speed. The curse was strongest on her hand, the most important part for magic, which is why the heroine had to endure the removal of the curse with Carlos's bracelet. In it was not only the power of Emperor Perceta locked away, but also Hayden's magic. Little by little, the magical chains began to disappear. Rue was very stubborn and resisted firmly. Looking at her hand through tears, she couldn't believe the curse was fading before her eyes. That's why this time it will be Hayden who rescues the young Miss Jeans. They couldn't break all the chains at once, or it would tear off her fingers or even her hand. Even if the master does everything right, it will hurt her immensely. The pain of removing the curse from her finger was so intense that Rue couldn't imagine what would happen with her head. Hayden asked her not to suppress the pain, but she was very embarrassed. Besides, she didn't want him to touch her with his lips, but to use something else. However, Hayden did like it when his lady felt no pain, and of course he loved spending time with her. So his concerns were only that he showed weakness when they were in Khaled. At least there he listened to Rustica, and always spoke courteously as the girl felt better that way. The Emperor was thinking of returning to that treatment. In that instant, Hayden took her hand and spoke as if he had returned from high society. He was glad it wasn't like that. Besides, they were already finished. Now the protagonist had to wear the bracelet daily and put on the earrings he gave her. Trying to stop the Emperor from talking nonsense, Rustica believed he hadn't learned from her in the past. She gave bread to the young Hayden in exchange for good behavior. She took on the burden of protecting him from danger and from eating too quickly, and tomorrow she promised to give him more bread and milk. Praying every night to his late mother, Hayden thought Rustica was an angel sent by her, although of course no angel would teach him to use a sword in such a strange way. She always praised him for his solid foundation, alternating compliments with punishments, but she didn't want Hayden to spend his entire life paying her back for her care. Rue saved the master when he was ruined, and he would return the favor by being by her side through thick and thin. Suddenly, the protagonist felt unwell, and the conversation had to be postponed while the Emperor carried her to her room. He reminded her of the upcoming banquet. Although Rue had never done anything like it, no one would be better than her as the Emperor's partner. The weakened girl fell asleep quickly, but Hayden couldn't take his eyes off her. She had told him everything being sincere, and the master hoped that in her dreams she would be happy. That day, while everyone was busy training, Alwyn suddenly decided to take his leave. Presenting himself before His Majesty, he came to greet the eternal son of the Kayeta Empire by order of the Emperor. The young man revealed that Rustica is now under the protection of the Imperials and the Emperor at Chailey Palace. And soon a festive banquet will be held where Lady Rustica is expected to appear. According to Alwyn, Elisa Barkova is already preparing for the banquet that will take place in 1 week. Rustica Jeans will inevitably meet her end there. After giving the order to cancel the mission, Carlos decided to deal with Rustica himself. If it weren't for Lady Greta Farou, it would have been difficult to prepare an outfit for the banquet. All the satin fabric was sold out, and the ladies were very upset about not being able to order satin dresses, but for the lady that is not a problem, as a special and exquisite fabric has been prepared for her. To complement the pearl accessories, they sewed her a pure cream-colored silk dress. Her mother believed that for fidelity vows, they usually used the color blue in the fabric, but Lady Greta was sure that cream better enhanced her pure and elegant beauty. The Countess didn't even notice how her daughter had grown up and was ready for marriage. It turned out that Rue's father's intuition in these matters was quite terrifying. Mother was just trying to say that the Emperor is out of your reach. No one had ever seen His Majesty show such interest in someone in his entire service. All the things Rustica uses now were gifted to her by the Emperor. The heroine had never before thought about what she would do if he confessed his feelings. Mylène believed that her daughter was the type who could make a man fall in love even if he were blind. It is natural that in their relationship since youth, feelings could arise. But that is often not the case, being from an enemy country. They should live cautiously for a few more generations. No matter how many achievements they accomplish, they will never be recognized for certain. The Emperor's position was not ideal. He will have to marry the proper lady from the East. The parents did not want to force their daughter into a marriage of convenience, but they wanted Rustica to meet someone who would understand her and support her. The lack of strong support from the bride's parents would be a weakness. Mylène only wished for her daughter to experience happiness, forgetting the suffering and tears, and she was in a position where she could not even hold her daughter. Normally, Rue could marry a man of high status for money, but her mother did not believe it to be so. Earning money was sweat and blood. Neither her mother nor her father expected Rustica to bring money home. They simply did not want others to point fingers at their precious daughter. Memories and emotions are important, but sometimes you have to let them go for a while. This is just a fling that was meant to come to an end. The protagonist knew it, and was prepared to break off their relationship, but inexplicably the pain in her soul would not cease, as if it were leaving a scar. Now that there was nothing to worry about, Ruth also knew everything, and did not want to be a burden to her parents. It hurt so much to lose Hayden, but she could not turn her back on the family she had regained. Tears ran down her cheeks as a sign of gratitude and forgiveness for leaving him shortly after Alwyn reported the Emperor's order, instructing Elise not to kill Rustica, but to watch over her, and not to forget to monitor the rumors as plans could be hatched in the dirty alleys. In one bar, some men were commenting that the Emperor had placed police near the palace. Here people spoke of the Emperor as casually as they did of their daily meals. If a man with more dignity ruled well, they surely would not speak like this. The Emperor of this country was far from a worthy ruler for Elisa lately. Everyone notices that the children in the alleys are eating well thanks to the palace hospital, no matter how much the nobility protests. The workers like the new Emperor a lot. Elisa understood that this Emperor was desperate enough to worry about the poor. On the day of the first ball for the Count's daughter, Hayden arrived too early. Without giving her time to get dressed, he just wanted to finish early and wait for her, as if they were the perfect couple. What an irony then. Rustica ran like a bat out of hell to her chambers to be dressed quickly. But the servants decided to take their time and start with the crinoline. It was decided that the bow around her waist should match the color of her eyes, keeping in mind that the Emperor would be Rue's partner, The full skirt was the ideal option. In a cream-colored dress with green bows that highlighted her eyes, Rustica looked stunning. Mrs. Greta finished faster than Hayden expected, so he promised to reward her. For him, it was a great honor to be the partner of the charming Rustica tonight. Before arriving, the Emperor ordered the young lady to wait in another room, and to enter a little later. When Emperor Hayden entered the palace, Simon introduced the son of the Empire, and the knights bowed their heads upon seeing him. A confused Rustica lowered her head as a sign of respect. However, the Lord immediately ordered her to relax and use her head, unable to resist. Hayden was captivated by the young woman's beauty and held her tightly. They had to be apart for a while, so the Emperor ordered the guard to protect the lady. Immediately afterward, he ordered Simon to prepare a full report. It seems the embassy of Cayeta is still trying to find something compromising about them. Additionally, there are indications that Alwyn visited Katat in secret and El Isa was investigating in dark alleys. The situation with the monsters in the north and the west remained calm as expected. If the situation worsens, the Emperor threatened to simply destroy the west and the north. A large part of Cayeta is useless land, so Carlos kept the southern and central regions. It turned out that all the nobles attended the banquet. What a surprise! The Emperor was almost touched by their dutifulness toward him. They deserve to be praised for their loyalty. The time has come to present the son of Prospera. His Majesty the Emperor has arrived thanks to the hard work of the Empire. This year you will be able to enjoy a full social season after taking his throne. Hayden truly hoped that everyone would have fun. Upon seeing the joyless faces of the guests, the Lord did not change his decision. The ball will begin regardless of the fact that everyone seemed not very happy. It seemed that at the banquet to celebrate the victory, all the guests should be happy. Working hard, the Emperor did his utmost to destroy the monsters for the safety of the nation, but now it greatly affected him that everyone around him seemed displeased. Confused, the Lord and Lady could not even express how grateful they were to His Majesty. It turned out to be more boring than Hayden thought. Hoping there would be something more interesting, according to Simon, there was something His Majesty should check personally. It turns out that Lady Rustica Yenisi Felas, who returned the royal remains, has prepared a gift for the Lord. To the sound of drums, Miss Yanis entered the throne room holding a huge tray. For her daughter's peace, Countess Milan hoped it was just a fleeting feeling, bowing her head. The young woman wanted to greet the son of the Empire, but Hayden ordered her to forget it, as was to be expected in front of everyone. The Emperor refused to accept the greeting from an inferior family with all his might. Simon was trying to hint to him not to behave so obviously. Lady Rustica brought the sacred symbol that by right should belong to His Majesty. It was considered lost for a long time. However, the lady regretted that not all of its parts were present. She believed that at least some parts could enhance the honor of the Emperor and of Perceta. They are the treasures of Perceta that Carlos Ingram stole from the royal treasury 430 years ago. Their shine was so incredible that no one doubted their authenticity. Rustica was glad to have recovered those two insignias, the scepter and the imperial orb, but two symbols of the imperial crown were still missing: the crown and the sword. However, the discovery of those two lost symbols was equally shocking. The most valuable treasures were brought to Hayden, and he could not just accept them. That is why he was willing to do whatever Miss Eunice desired. Rue wanted nothing in return, only for the Emperor to remember this meeting perhaps in the future. She might decide to ask His Majesty for a favor if the occasion arose. She asked for the honor of personally beheading Carlos Ingram. As expected, the daughter of the Counts Felas was a true warrior, since that was not in the planned script. Hayden begged her to take it back. He declared that it was inappropriate to discuss a war with Cayeta at this moment. If the Emperor of Cayeta were to endanger these lands, Rustica would go to the front lines. The Countess never imagined that her daughter would ask the Emperor to have Carlos beheaded. Only that answer would alleviate the stigma of the Yenes for originating from Cayeta. In that case, Hayden surmised they were trying to use his will for something uncertain. She longed to fulfill that wish not only for herself, but for her entire family. Escape from Cayeta. If it were easy to fulfill, it would not be a simple wish, right? However, the Emperor promised to grant that right to Lady Rustica if the day came. Hayden felt that he was being rejected because of that damned Carlos. If it were not for Rue's curse, he would have cut off his head instantly after killing that bastard Carlos. Hayden dreamed of completely filling Lady Ruth's head with himself. When the ball began, there was a long debate about who His Majesty would dance with. Some thought he might simply say that he was not interested in the banquet. The nobility was convinced that after defeating the largest wave of monsters, conversations about marriage would begin. His Majesty could not leave the position of Empress vacant forever, especially with his talents. But for them, the people of the West would hardly be a consideration. The most suitable option would be one of the daughters of the Eastern Noble Alliance. The Almson coalition covets the fertile lands, and even covet the imperial throne out of pure greed. Another candidate was the daughter of Duke Alanka Katerina Lambert. She arrived at the ball accompanied by her brother, the firstborn son of Duke Alan Count of Elch, named Manuel Lambert. Among the crowd, Catherine suddenly spotted the daughter of Marcus Sven, Lady Sven Even Lambert. She was not sure if the Emperor would even dance that night. According to rumor, no one could force the man who fought monsters. On the imperial front line, besides Catherine, there were more than 20 noble ladies from the Alson coalition in the hall, which was why her brother wanted her to try even harder and dance with the Emperor. The lady supposed that His Majesty desired a duel among the Eastern nobility for a place by his side for the duration of the music. The Emperor waited for his lady, but Rustica was already running late. After expressing her wish, the young woman thought her duties were done. However, it was only matters of state that prevented them from being alone. None of that mattered to Hayden. He was ready to ask Miss James to dance right now, just one dance, a gesture in honor of the one who organized this event. In the dance, their bodies merged, as if they were extensions of each other telling a love story in Cayette. The girl only watched over the ladies who danced in that manner. Not everything was bad. Sometimes she also felt like dressing up and dancing. But Hayden noticed that while in his arms, the girl was thinking of someone else. He wanted Miss James to think only of him while they danced, and he instantly remembered her request. For the first time, he understood that Rue trusted him. The Lord couldn't believe she needed a public confirmation. The heroine was intelligent, and knew His Majesty couldn't refuse. Hayden himself wanted to destroy that bastard, often imagining his suffering, and when it was all over, he allowed the girl to take Carlos's head. Without objections, however, with one wish, Rui preferred to be addressed as a noble, not as a woman. The Emperor had already promised her something publicly, so he wanted to get something personal in return. But the lady dismissed it so easily, although he did not agree with it at all. In that case, if everything went well, the Emperor asked for something in return. But first he wanted to know what wish Miss Jens would ask for if all these problems didn't exist. Rue wished for nothing more than what the Emperor had promised her. She dreamed of a family, and Hayden gave her one. Unfortunately, it was not a lie. And that was why the Lord hated that bastard. Carlos occupied so much space in Lady Rustica's head that there was no room left for Hayden. In reality, there might be something else, a wish different from revenge. Something so valuable that Rue hid it in the deepest part of her being, something that could never ever come to light again. In a short time, the Count was happy to see his daughter healthy, safe and glowing with health. Meanwhile, Ellen was demonstrating her talent at a social reception. Rue's longing was to be reunited with her parents, and now that it was fulfilled, she needed nothing more. However, Lord Ethan did not understand how a young woman could desire nothing. Suddenly, the Count noticed some people. It had been so long since he had enjoyed seeing them. According to a gentleman, today's party was a truly joyous event for House Jeans. The Count's daughter did an incredible job, which is why the lords wanted to greet her in person. But her father declared that she should rest today as she had worked very hard. It turns out that Ruby contributed nothing to enrich the national treasury. After talking with those men, Ethan was left with a bad feeling, but Viscountess Panem quickly dispelled his sadness with her arrival and that of her son Nicholas. Nicholas Stewart was very kind and greeted the young lady, Jeans, with great pleasure. The young man could not miss this opportunity and invited the lady to dance. He was 1,000 times better than those nobles who shamelessly hint at marriage and dance for reputation. Nicholas had only read about the symbols of the imperial family in historical texts. Dancing with him was very easy. Before, when Ruby danced with Hayden, she always got nervous. It was difficult to hide one's admiration for such a beautiful lady, and who also brought great treasures. Seeing them, Hayden decided to find another way to dispose of the monster carcasses. Their dance was imperfect. Nicholas was not a master and often stumbled. At that moment, the protagonist believed that Hayden had foreseen everything while dancing with him. When Rustica danced with the Emperor, everything was perfect. She made mistakes due to her nerves, leaving all thoughts of him behind. The young woman decided to focus on the man in front of her. After all, His Majesty was simply the one she served. Soon the dance ended, and the young lady, Jeans, was left alone. She constantly wondered if Hayden was watching her. She should not think about him. After all, she had already promised to forget him. As promised, her father brought her fresh orange juice. He would do anything for his daughter. The heroine grew tired of thinking that she might end up alone if every man was like Hayden. Now was not the ideal time to think about men. Her goal was revenge. She had barely gotten the Emperor out of her head when she suddenly noticed the son of the Empire again. As expected, he had become the perfect target for the ladies of high society. To be honest, Rustica knew that Hayden could not have eyes only for her. Her father distracted her thoughts for a moment. It turns out he dances wonderfully. Count Ethan was good at everything, which is why she had such high standards for men, actually. Rue missed him very much, and her father was happy that she was back home. The Count's daughter was a true lady. She looked splendid, and the dress suited her perfectly. She did not know people chatted so much while dancing until she met the Baron, who stepped on her dress in public. Everyone protects their image. That is why they use dancing for private conversations. Today, the Count was going to take his daughter home, but first he asked her to calm her sisters down. Rue's feat in Belfort impressed them, and now they want to be knights. Only the youngest one needed time. After all, they are still girls. Ethan remembered that Rustica was the same when she was little. He completely forgot that she broke her leg at 8 years old, falling off a horse while trying to be like her mother. It was time to rest. This was a suitable place with plenty of security, but what she saw made the heroine realize that not even His Majesty could ignore the coalition. The Alsman coalition, of course. That was precisely why he was dancing with Duchess Alanka, who was influential in the East. Late in the evening, Sir Ethan ran into an old acquaintance at the ball, Sir Manuel. He heard that the Lord had had a hard time with those monsters. Rustica introduced herself politely and met Manuel Lambert. At that moment, Count Elch's eyes met the Emperor's, who was watching them intently. Certain that the lady was tired of greetings, Manuel said his goodbyes as it was late before departing. Her mother ordered Rustica to write 3 times a day. More goodbyes were unnecessary. The girl would only truly rest once her parents were gone. Soon the carriage departed. While the protagonist was lost in her thoughts, her mind was occupied with only one thing. Hayden was the source of her nightmares and deliberations. But suddenly, the carriage braked sharply, and Miss Jeans almost fell from the shock. At that moment, she felt someone grab her, forcefully by the arm dragging her forward. With no strength to resist, Rustica fell violently to the ground, and she felt an intense weakness. But when she finally gathered the strength to look her enemy in the eyes, she saw her death. The man she so often dreamed of beheading had finally given her the opportunity. He had finally given her that opportunity. In ancient times, it is rumored that God raised a wall to test humanity. The magical wall divided the continent.